The judge was about to close the hearing when a 10-year-old boy stood up and asked to question the witness.
Please, just one question.
District Attorney Roland Vance rose immediately, furious that a child was being allowed anywhere near the case.
Grief does not make a child an expert.
Caleb, you do not have to carry this. I already told them what I remembered.
Judge Helena Cross had seen families cry before, but the boy did not look ready to perform. He looked terrified.
One question, nothing more.
Please let them hear him this time.
Caleb had to stand on a wooden step just to reach the microphone adults had ignored for 2 years.
You all trusted the time, but no one checked it.
Vance called the conviction airtight, but the child's calmness revealed the first crack in his confidence.
Choose your words carefully, boy.
Hidden inside a photograph everyone had already seen was a mistake that had stolen 2 years from an innocent man. Silas watched his son prepare to ask the question every trained adult had failed to ask.
The truth is still here. That sign, I only turned it after closing.
Then Caleb asked the one question no one else had thought to ask.
What time did your store close on Sunday nights?
Long before Caleb Turner stood in that courtroom, before reporters knew his name, and before one simple question threatened to tear apart a prosecutor's perfect conviction, he knew his father as the man who could make forgotten clocks speak again. Silas Turner owned a narrow repair shop on the oldest street in Briar Creek. The sign above the door read, "Turner Clockworks," though time and rain had faded some of the gold lettering. Inside, the walls were crowded with mantel clocks, pocket watches, brass carriage clocks, wooden regulators, and tall grandfather clocks whose pendulums moved with the patience of men who had seen generations come and go. The shop never sounded completely quiet. Even after closing, even when Silas turned off the lights and locked the front door, dozens of clocks continued ticking in different rhythms. Some ran fast, some ran slow. Some chimed several seconds apart, filling the darkness with imperfect music. Caleb loved that sound. While other children spent their afternoons watching cartoons or throwing balls in the street, Caleb sat on a tall stool beside his father's workbench. His feet did not reach the floor, so they swung beneath him while he watched Silas work beneath the yellow light of a desk lamp. Silas handled every clock as if it were alive. He never forced a rusted gear. He never twisted a hand that resisted. He listened first. He watched. He removed each screw carefully, placed every tiny part on dark velvet, and searched for the smallest sign of damage. To most people, a broken clock was only an object that no longer worked. To Silas, it was a witness. A worn tooth on a gear meant the movement had been carrying too much strain. A bent minute hand meant someone had tried to reset it too roughly. A faint scratch inside the case could reveal that an earlier repairman had installed the wrong part. Nothing stopped without a reason, Silas often told Caleb. Every failure left a trace. Caleb remembered one afternoon when an elderly woman brought in a pocket watch wrapped in a white handkerchief. It had belonged to her husband and had not ticked since the morning he died. She could not afford a proper restoration, but she asked Silas whether he could make it run just once more. Silas worked on that watch for 3 evenings. When the woman returned, he placed it gently in her palm. The watch began ticking, soft but steady, and the woman closed her fingers around it as tears filled her eyes. She tried to pay, but Silas refused. He told her some repairs were worth more than money. Ruth Turner loved her husband for moments like that, though she also worried about them. Kindness did not pay the rent. Sentiment did not buy groceries. Their life was always balanced between enough and almost enough. Ruth worked mornings, cleaning rooms at a motel near the highway, and covered evening shifts at a laundromat when bills grew too heavy. Silas repaired clocks, watches, music boxes, and occasionally old mechanical toys. Caleb did his homework at the front counter and ate dinner from paper containers when Ruth worked late. They were not wealthy, but their home had warmth. Silas laughed easily. Ruth sang while cooking. Caleb fell asleep most nights, hearing the faint ticking of the small brass travel clock his father kept beside the kitchen window. Silas had one lesson he repeated more than any other. When time is wrong, everything built on it becomes wrong too. At first, Caleb thought his father was only talking about clocks. A minute hand, placed incorrectly, could cause the chime to strike at the wrong hour. One gear installed out of position could throw the entire mechanism out of rhythm. A small mistake hidden inside the case could make every movement afterward incorrect. Caleb had no idea that those words would one day become the key to his father's freedom. The day everything changed was Sunday, March 10th. It was the first morning after daylight saving time began, the yearly adjustment that pushed clocks forward by 1 hour. Silas disliked it. He spent half the morning walking through the shop, resetting every clock one by one, while Caleb followed him with a notebook. Ruth teased him for treating the time change like a national emergency. Silas replied that people should not move time around carelessly, and then act surprised when the world became confused. Caleb laughed. By midnight, none of them would find the joke funny. Marlowe's Corner. Market sat beside County Road 17, a small convenience store with 2 aging gas pumps, a flickering soda sign, and a bell above the entrance that rang half a second after the door opened. Owen Marlowe had owned the store for more than 30 years. After his wife died, the market became more than a business. It gave him somewhere to go each morning, and a reason to keep speaking to people. Behind the register hung a red rooster wall clock. The paint was chipped, one wooden wing was cracked, and the pale face had yellowed with age. Owen's wife had bought it during the first year of their marriage. Even after she died, Owen could not bring himself to remove it. 2 weeks before the robbery, that clock had stopped. Owen considered throwing it away, but Silas offered to repair it. He cleaned the movement, replaced a worn spring, realigned the hands, and stayed long enough to make sure it kept accurate time. When Owen asked what he owed, Silas charged him only for the replacement part. The red rooster clock began ticking again behind the register. No one understood then that it would become the most important witness in Briar Creek. On the night of March 10th, a man entered Marlowe's Corner Market wearing a dark coat and a cap pulled low over his face. The security camera was old and mounted near the ceiling, creating a grainy image that hid more than it revealed. The man appeared tall. His shoulders were broad. His walk looked slightly uneven. He threatened Owen, forced him to open the register, took the cash bag, and left through the front entrance. The security footage displayed a timestamp of 8:18 p.m. Owen called 911 in a frightened, breathless voice. The emergency dispatch system recorded his call at 9:22 p.m. That 1 hour difference should have stopped the investigation before it began. Someone should have asked why a terrified store owner, who claimed to call immediately after the robber left, had waited more than an hour. No one did. The camera said 8:18, and the number appeared clean, mechanical, and official. It seemed easier to trust than memory. Less than 4 hours later, deputies arrived at the Turner home. The pounding on the door woke Caleb. He came into the hallway barefoot, wearing an oversized sleep shirt, and saw Ruth speaking to 2 officers beneath the porch light. Silas stood behind her. He had returned from work not long before and still smelled faintly of brass polish and machine oil. The deputies asked where he had been that evening. Silas explained that he had repaired the large wall clock inside St. Bartholomew's Church Hall. After finishing, he drove to a supplier's storage facility to collect a spring for an anniversary clock. His electronic access card had been scanned at the storage building at 9:07 p.m. The facility was more than 13 miles from Marlowe's Corner Market. Silas believed that record would protect him. But according to the camera, the robbery had happened at 8:18. The investigators assumed Silas could have robbed the store and then driven to the storage facility afterward. The deputies had already seen the footage. The robber was a tall black man with broad shoulders and an uneven step. Silas had injured his right knee years earlier while carrying a grandfather clock down a staircase. He sometimes limped when tired. He owned a dark coat. He had visited Owen's store 2 weeks before and knew where the camera and register were located. None of those details proved he was the robber. Together, they created a story the deputies were ready to believe. Caleb watched one officer place handcuffs around his father's wrists. The memory never left him. The wet shine of the pavement. Ruth repeating Silas's name. A neighbor's curtain moving across the street. the clocks inside their home ticking while the world outside stopped making sense. Silas turned toward Caleb before the patrol car door closed. He did not promise everything would be fine. Silas respected the truth too much to offer comfort he could not guarantee. He only told Caleb to take care of his mother. By morning, Briar Creek had already judged him. News traveled quickly through the town. A poor black clockmaker had robbed an elderly white shopkeeper. The camera had recorded the crime. Silas had known the store's layout. His business had been struggling. For people who wanted a simple answer, the story fit too easily. Customers stopped entering Turner Clockworks. Some claimed they wanted to wait until the facts were clear, though they had already decided which facts mattered. Others crossed the road rather than pass the shop. Someone wrote the word "thief" across the front window in black marker. Ruth tried to remove it before Caleb arrived from school, but the stain remained visible beneath the glass. At school, children repeated the words they heard at home. They asked Caleb whether his father had robbed other stores. One boy placed a plastic toy clock on Caleb's desk and joked that perhaps Silas could steal another hour from it. The teacher heard him. She looked away. That was the first time Caleb understood that silence could become permission. District Attorney Roland Vance took control of the case almost immediately. Vance was preparing to run for a state judgeship. He had built his reputation on swift convictions, polished speeches, and promises to protect honest families from crime. He appeared at church breakfasts, charity events, and press conferences. He knew exactly where to stand when cameras arrived and exactly how long to pause before saying the word justice. The Turner case was perfect for him. An elderly victim, a security video, a struggling defendant, a timeline simple enough for television. Vance told reporters the evidence was strong. He praised the deputies for acting quickly. He described Silas as someone who had used the trust of a local business owner to learn the store's vulnerabilities. Before the trial began, Vance had already turned the case into part of his political story. Silas received a court-appointed attorney named Brian Kell. Kell was not cruel. He was exhausted. His desk carried more files than any one lawyer could read carefully. He moved from hearing to hearing, bargaining cases, filling forms, and telling himself that doing something for each client was better than doing nothing. Silas explained the access card record from 907. He explained the repair at St. Bartholomew's. He explained that Owen claimed to have called 911 immediately, yet the emergency log showed 922. Kell wrote a few notes and promised to investigate. But he made the same mistake everyone else had made. He trusted the timestamp. At trial, Roland Vance repeated the time 8:18 until it became the heartbeat of the prosecution's case. At 8:18, the robber entered the store. At 8:18, Owen Marlowe feared for his life. At 8:18, Silas Turner had no verified alibi. The access card scan at 9:07 seemed irrelevant if the robbery occurred almost 50 minutes earlier. Vance suggested Silas had committed the crime, changed his route, and then appeared at the storage building to create distance from the scene. The 911 call at 9:22 was treated as evidence of Owen's trauma. Vance told the jury that a terrified elderly man could not be expected to remember every minute after being threatened. Perhaps Owen had locked the doors. Perhaps he had sat in shock. Perhaps fear had distorted his sense of time. Vance transformed the contradiction into sympathy. Then he delivered the sentence that stayed in Caleb's mind for years. The camera had no reason to lie. It sounded powerful. Mechanical evidence seemed pure. A camera had no prejudice, no fear, no political ambition, and no desire to protect one man or accuse another. But no one asked whether the camera knew the correct time. Brian Kell did not call a security system expert. He did not inspect the recorder's settings. He did not enlarge the background of the footage. He did not ask about the daylight saving time change. He did not ask why the closed sign appeared turned toward the street. He did not ask why a mop bucket was visible near the counter, or why Owen's bank deposit bag had already been placed beside the register. Most importantly, he did not ask about the red rooster clock. Caleb sat behind his mother throughout the trial. He was 8 years old and did not understand every legal term, but he understood tone. He knew when adults were searching for truth and when they were only waiting for their turn to speak. No one was truly listening to Silas. When Silas testified, he spoke calmly. Some members of the jury seemed to expect innocence to sound louder. They expected rage, dramatic denial, or a fist striking the table. Silas had spent his life working around fragile mechanisms. He chose his words carefully. Vance used that caution against him. He made Silas confirm that his business had financial problems. He made him admit that he had been inside Marlowe's store. He made him admit that he knew where the security camera was mounted. He made him confirm that he owned a dark coat and walked with a limp. Each fact proved little by itself. Together, beneath Vance's confident voice, they became a cage. The jury found Silas guilty. Ruth made a sound Caleb had never heard from her before. It was not a scream. It was quieter and more painful, as if something inside her had torn, and there was not enough air left to release it. Silas Turner was sentenced to 16 years in prison. Outside the courthouse, Roland Vance gave a statement, praising law enforcement, and promising that Briar Creek would remain a town where criminals faced consequences. Cameras flashed while he spoke. That evening, local news described the case as a clean conviction. Caleb would later hate that phrase. Nothing about what followed was clean. Turner Clockworks closed within a month. Ruth tried to keep it alive, but customers never returned. The landlord waited until the legal deadline and changed the locks. Tools, shelves, and unfinished repairs were sold for a fraction of their value. A dealer from another county bought most of the clocks in bulk. Caleb saved only one. It was a small brass travel clock with a cracked glass face. He slipped it beneath his sweater before anyone could attach a price tag. That night, he wound it carefully and placed it beneath his pillow. The ticking was uneven, but it continued. Ruth and Caleb moved into a narrow room behind the laundromat where she worked at night. The walls trembled whenever the large machines entered their spin cycles. The air smelled of detergent, damp clothing, and warm metal. Caleb slept on a small cot beside cardboard boxes. Ruth slept in a folding chair and claimed it was comfortable. Caleb knew she was lying, but it was the kind of lie parents use to protect children from guilt. Every Wednesday, Ruth drove Caleb to visit Silas. The prison was 2 hours away. Caleb hated the metal detector, the locked doors, the plastic chairs, and the guards who spoke to families, as if love were another item that needed inspection. Silas always smiled when they arrived. That smile hurt more than anything. He asked about school. He asked about Ruth's health. He asked whether Caleb had kept the brass clock running. He rarely spoke about the 16-year sentence. Perhaps the number was too large to hold an ordinary conversation. One afternoon, Caleb finally asked why the truth had not saved him. Silas stared through the scratched plastic barrier for a long time. He could have told his son that truth always won in the end. It would have sounded comforting. It would also have been dishonest. Instead, Silas explained that truth did not fail because it was weak. It failed when people stopped looking for it. That sentence followed Caleb home. It remained with him during the long bus ride, through Ruth's exhausted silence, and into the room behind the laundromat. That night, Caleb lay awake with the brass clock ticking beside his pillow. He thought about 8:18. He thought about the access card at 9:07. He thought about the 911 call at 9:22. The numbers were supposed to belong to the same night, but they did not move together. They were like gears from different clocks, forced into the same mechanism. For the first time, Caleb's grief began to change. It did not become hope. Not yet. It became a question. If the law was built from books, records, timestamps, photographs, signatures, and statements, perhaps it was not an invisible monster. Perhaps it was a machine, a massive machine. A machine powerful enough to crush people when the wrong part failed. And every broken machine left a trace. Caleb began going to the Briar Creek Public Library after school. The legal books were stored on a lower shelf near outdated tax manuals. They were heavy, dusty, and filled with words that seemed designed to keep ordinary people outside. Affidavit, transcript, petition, evidentiary hearing, chain of custody, post-conviction relief, procedural default. At first, Caleb understood almost nothing, so he copied the words into a notebook and looked them up one by one. He whispered them beneath his breath until they stopped sounding like locked doors. He searched old newspaper articles. He read court summaries. He learned how to request public records. Ruth tried to stop him. She believed Silas was innocent, but she had already watched the system take her husband, their home, their business, and nearly all her strength. She did not want it to take Caleb's childhood too. She told him some doors were too heavy for a child to open. Caleb asked whether they became lighter when everyone stopped pushing. Ruth had no answer. By the time he turned 9, the library staff recognized him. He came after school, on weekends, and during Ruth's longest shifts. He drew timelines on sheets of paper and taped them together because one page was not large enough to contain everything that felt wrong. He wrote the 3 times repeatedly: 8:18, 9:07, 9:22. That was when Marion Whitaker noticed him. Marion was 73 and had spent 38 years working as a court clerk. She had watched lawyers enter courtrooms full of confidence and leave without understanding the lives they had changed. She knew how cases disappeared beneath paperwork. She knew how a missing signature, an incorrect date, or an unexamined record could become the difference between freedom and prison. Retirement had made her quieter, but it had not made her forget. For several weeks, Marion watched Caleb from across the library. She saw him struggle with court forms too complicated for his age. She watched him feed coins into the photocopier, copying pages from his father's case. One afternoon, she asked what he was working on. Caleb hesitated. Adults often sounded interested just before telling him to stop. He said it was his father's case. When Marion heard the name Silas Turner, her expression shifted. She remembered the trial. She remembered how quickly it had moved. She remembered Roland Vance discussing the conviction at political events. She remembered courthouse employees whispering that Brian Kell had seemed unprepared. Most of all, she remembered thinking that the timeline felt too neat. Marion asked to see Caleb's notes. She read for almost an hour without speaking. Caleb expected her to tell him he misunderstood the law. Instead, she paused at the 911 log, then at the access record, then at the camera timestamp. Finally, Marion told him that if he wanted to understand a broken case, he would need the whole record, not only the pieces adults had allowed him to see. That was how Caleb found his first ally. Marion did not promise to free Silas. She knew too much about the system to offer easy hope. She helped Ruth file requests for transcripts and evidence. She explained legal terms Caleb had misunderstood. She showed him which documents mattered and which only looked important. Most importantly, she did not take the investigation away from him. She guided him, but she allowed him to keep searching. Together, they rebuilt the night of March 10th. The camera said 8:18. Silas's access card said 9:07. The 911 record said 9:22. Owen's first statement said he called police immediately after the robber left. If Owen was telling the truth, the robbery could not have happened at 8:18. Marion requested the original still photographs from the security footage. Weeks later, they arrived in a worn brown envelope. Caleb spread them across a library table. At first, he made the same mistake everyone else had made. He studied the robber. The dark coat, the broad shoulders, the lowered head, the uneven walk. The image was too unclear to identify anyone, yet close enough to Silas's shape to explain why frightened people had stopped looking. Marion watched Caleb struggle with the resemblance. Then she asked what his father would examine if the photograph were a broken clock. Caleb looked up. Marion reminded him that a clockmaker did not stare only at the hand that had stopped. He studied the entire mechanism. So Caleb stopped looking at the robber. He looked at the counter, the coffee machine, the rack of snacks, the mop bucket near the aisle, the bank deposit bag beneath Owen's arm. The sign on the front door turned to show closed. Then Caleb saw the red rooster clock. It hung behind the register, partly hidden beneath glare. The black hands were thin against the pale face, but Caleb had spent years learning to read clocks from difficult angles. The timestamp in the corner of the security image read 8:18 p.m. The red rooster clock showed approximately 9:18. Caleb leaned closer. He checked the next image. The same difference. He checked another. Still 1 hour. His father had repaired that clock 2 weeks before the robbery. Silas had checked its movement and ensured it kept accurate time. Caleb looked at Marion, afraid to trust what he was seeing. Marion reached for a calendar. March 10th was the first day after daylight saving time began. Owen had moved the hands of the wall clock forward by 1 hour, but the old security recorder had not updated automatically. The camera timestamp was 1 hour slow. The robbery had not happened at 8:18. It had happened at 9:18. Suddenly, every piece moved into place. Owen's 911 call at 9:22 came 4 minutes after the robbery, exactly as his first statement claimed. Silas's access card showed him entering a storage facility 13 miles away at 9:07. He could not have reached Marlowe's corner market 11 minutes later. For 2 years, Silas Turner had been imprisoned because everyone trusted a camera without checking its clock. The truth had not been missing. It had been ticking in the background of the evidence from the beginning. But finding the truth and proving it in court were not the same thing. Marion knew Roland Vance would fight them. His reputation, his campaign, and perhaps several other convictions depended on keeping the Turner case closed. They would need the security system manual, dispatch records, access logs, maintenance documents, and Owen Marlowe's testimony. They would need to make frightened adults admit that a child had seen what they had ignored. And before Caleb could ask his one question in court, Roland Vance would use every part of his power to make sure the truth never reached the witness stand. Roland Vance learned about the new evidence before the hearing date was announced. By then, Marion had helped Ruth submit the security photographs, the access card record, the emergency dispatch log, and the manual for the old camera system. The documents were enough to force the court to take a second look, but not enough to guarantee justice. Marion knew that courts did not reopen convictions simply because the truth seemed obvious to a family. The truth had to survive procedure, opposition, and the pride of everyone whose reputation depended on the original verdict remaining untouched. Vance understood the danger immediately. If the robbery had taken place at 9:18 rather than 8:18, Silas's conviction did not merely become questionable, it became impossible to defend. The access log placed him more than 13 miles away, 11 minutes before the crime. Owen's emergency call supported the corrected time. The Red Rooster clock supported it. Even the store's closing routine supported it. But Silas was not the only thing Vance could lose. The Turner conviction had appeared in his campaign speeches. He had praised it as proof that his office trusted evidence over excuses. He had used the case to present himself as a prosecutor who moved quickly, protected elderly victims, and refused to be manipulated by emotional defenses. If a 10-year-old boy proved that his office had ignored the most basic question in the case, voters would not see a minor technical error. They would see arrogance. And once people began questioning one conviction, they might begin questioning others. Vance could not allow that. He did not threaten Ruth directly. That would have been too crude and too easy to expose. Instead, a local reporter received an anonymous suggestion that the Turner family was using Caleb's age to create public sympathy. An article appeared describing the new evidence as an emotional theory developed by a grieving child and a retired clerk with no authority to retry the case. The article did not call Caleb foolish. It did something more effective. It made him sound harmless. At school, the whispers returned. Some children said Caleb was pretending to be a lawyer. Others said his mother wanted money from the county. One teacher advised him privately that he should focus on school and leave legal matters to adults. Caleb listened without arguing. Adults had handled the legal matters before. His father was still in prison. Ruth found the article folded beneath their door one morning. Someone had circled the phrase emotional theory in red ink. She tore the page in half, then into smaller pieces, but Caleb had already seen it. He told her it did not matter. Ruth looked at him and recognized the same careful expression Silas used when hiding pain. She wanted to tell Caleb he did not have to be brave all the time. She wanted to take the files away, close the notebooks, and protect what remained of his childhood. But the hearing was now their only path forward, and turning back would not restore anything already lost. So Ruth did what she had done for 2 years. She kept moving. Marion focused on the evidence. She found an archived copy of the camera recorder's operating manual, which confirmed that the system did not automatically adjust for daylight saving time. The clock had to be changed manually through a sequence of menus Owen Marlowe had never learned to use. They obtained a certified copy of Silas's access card scan at 9:07:43 p.m. They confirmed the storage facility was 13.4 miles from Marlowe's corner market. Even under ideal conditions, the drive took more than 17 minutes. They also found a service receipt from St. Bartholomew's Church Hall. Silas had signed it at 8:46 p.m. after adjusting the church's large wall clock for the time change. A church custodian remembered seeing him leave. Each piece strengthened the corrected timeline. But the most important witness remained Owen Marlowe. Without Owen confirming his closing routine and the accuracy of the red rooster clock, Vance could argue that the wall clock had been wrong, that the photograph was unclear, or that the time difference was only speculation. Marion went to see him. Marlowe's corner. Market looked older than Caleb remembered. The soda sign still flickered. One gas pump had been covered with a plastic sheet. The bell above the entrance rang too late, sounding only after Marion had stepped fully inside. Owen stood behind the counter with both hands resting on the edge. The red rooster clock still hung behind him. It was ticking. Marion introduced herself and explained why she had come. Owen did not ask her to sit. He did not offer coffee. He kept wiping the same section of counter with a cloth that was already dry. At first, he repeated what he had said during the original investigation. The robber had been tall. The man had moved like Silas. He had known the store. The camera showed the time. Marion asked whether he had adjusted the wall clock on the morning of March 10th. Owen's hand stopped moving, only for a second. Then he said he did not remember. Marion asked whether the security recorder had been adjusted. Owen said he did not know. She asked what time he usually closed on Sundays. 9 o'clock, he answered automatically. Then he realized what he had said. His eyes moved toward the rooster clock. Marion saw fear settle over him before he lowered his gaze. A few days earlier, someone from Vance's office had visited the store. The assistant had spoken politely, almost kindly. He reminded Owen that changing his testimony could cause serious problems. People might accuse him of helping convict an innocent man. Silas's family might sue him. Insurance investigators might reopen the robbery claim. Customers might stop trusting him. No one told Owen to lie. They only explained how painful the truth could become. Fear completed the rest. Owen told Marion that 2 years was a long time. He said his memory was unreliable. He said maybe he had flipped the closed sign early that night. Maybe he had prepared the deposit before 9. Maybe the rooster clock had been wrong despite Silas's repair. Marion knew those possibilities had not come from memory. They had been given to him as hiding places. She did not accuse him. She only said that Silas had already paid for Owen's fear with 2 years of his life. Owen looked away. When Marion returned to the laundromat, Caleb knew from her expression that the meeting had gone badly. She spread her notes across the small table. They had the technical evidence, but Owen planned to say he could not remember. Vance would use that uncertainty to attack everything else. He would argue that the wall clock might have been inaccurate, that the store routine could vary, and that the defense was forcing meaning into an unclear photograph. Marion began preparing questions. She wrote them carefully, one after another. Had Owen personally changed the security recorder after daylight saving time? Did he know whether the system updated automatically? Had the red rooster clock been keeping accurate time? Did he call 911 immediately after the robber left? Was the close sign turned before or after the last customer departed? Did he prepare the bank deposit before or after closing? The list grew longer. Caleb copied the questions and studied them every night. He understood why Marion had written each one. The questions were precise. They were logical. They covered every important detail. But something felt wrong. Whenever Caleb imagined Owen on the witness stand, he saw the old man retreating behind the same answer. I do not remember. A technical question gave him somewhere to hide. A question about the camera allowed him to blame the machine. A question about daylight saving time allowed him to claim confusion. A question about the exact minute allowed Vance to argue that trauma had damaged his memory. Caleb did not need Owen to explain the technology. He needed him to remember his own life. The night before the hearing, Caleb sat on the floor of the room behind the laundromat. Ruth had fallen asleep in the folding chair, with her shoes still on. The building had gone quiet, except for one dryer, turning slowly in the next room. The security photographs lay around Caleb. He studied the image again. The robber stood near the counter. Owen was behind the register. The closed sign had been turned. The mop bucket was near the aisle. The bank deposit bag rested beneath Owen's arm. The red rooster clock showed 9:18. Caleb thought about the way his father repaired clocks. When an entire mechanism seemed wrong, Silas never touched every gear at once. He searched for the single part that explained all the others. Caleb picked up Marion's list of questions. He crossed out the first one, then the second, then another. He continued until nearly every line disappeared beneath his pencil. When Marion arrived the next morning, Caleb handed her the page. Only one idea remained. Marion read it twice. The question did not mention the camera. It did not mention the time change. It did not accuse Owen of lying. It did not sound like a lawyer's question at all. That was precisely why it might work. The courthouse was already crowded when they arrived. News of the hearing had spread through Briar Creek. Reporters filled the hallway. Some people had come because they believed Silas was innocent. Others came because they wanted to see whether a child's theory would collapse under real scrutiny. Roland Vance stood near the courtroom doors, speaking with two assistants. His suit was dark, his tie perfectly centered, his expression calm. When he saw Caleb, he gave the boy a brief smile. It was not kindness. It was the smile of a man reminding an opponent that the room belonged to him. Silas was brought into court wearing a plain shirt Ruth had sent through his attorney. Prison had changed him. He was thinner. Gray had begun to appear in his beard. His shoulders curved slightly forward, as though 2 years of being watched had taught him to occupy less space. Caleb wanted to run to him. The rules did not allow it. So father and son looked at one another across the room. Silas glanced at the papers in Caleb's hands. Then he gave the smallest nod. It was the same nod he used to give at the workbench when Caleb had finally placed a delicate gear in the correct position. Judge Helena Cross entered, and the courtroom rose. She was known for strict procedure and little patience for courtroom drama. That worried Ruth. It reassured Marion. A judge who disliked drama might be more willing to listen to evidence that did not depend on it. The hearing began with Marion presenting the newly discovered material through the attorney assisting the family. The access record was entered. The 911 log was entered. The service receipt from St. Bartholomew's was entered. The security system manual was entered. Vance challenged every piece. He argued that an access scan proved only that Silas's card had been used, not necessarily that Silas himself had used it. He suggested another person could have carried the card, even though no evidence supported that theory. He said the church receipt did not establish where Silas went afterward. He said the 911 call showed only when Owen contacted police, not when the robbery occurred. He called the wall clock interpretation unreliable because the security image was grainy and taken from an angle. Each argument was weak alone, but Vance delivered them with the confidence of a man who knew certainty could make speculation sound reasonable. Then Owen Marlowe was called to the witness stand. The old man walked slowly. He held his hat in both hands until the clerk told him to set it aside. When he took the oath, his voice trembled. At first, the questions were simple. He confirmed that he owned Marlowe's Corner Market. He confirmed that Silas had repaired the Red Rooster clock 2 weeks before the robbery. He confirmed the store normally closed at 9 on Sunday nights. Then Marion's side asked whether he had changed the wall clock for daylight saving time. Owen looked toward Vance. It was a quick glance. Judge Cross saw it. So did Caleb. Owen said he could not remember. He was asked whether he had changed the security recorder. He said he did not know how. He was asked whether the wall clock had been keeping accurate time. He said he believed so, but could not be certain. The questions moved closer to the central issue, and Owen's answers became less useful. He could not remember. It had been too long. The robbery had frightened him. He might have prepared the deposit early. He might have flipped the closed sign before 9. He might have waited before calling 911. Vance sat at the prosecution table with his hands folded. He did not need Owen to defend the original timeline. He only needed him to make the truth sound uncertain. When Vance questioned him, his tone became gentle. He reminded Owen that the night had been traumatic. He asked whether fear could affect memory. Owen agreed. He asked whether Owen had ever personally inspected the internal settings of the security recorder. Owen said no. He asked whether Owen could swear that the rooster clock had been perfectly accurate that evening. Owen hesitated. Then he said no. Vance thanked him and sat down. The faintest satisfaction crossed his face. The defense had found a discrepancy, but he believed he had contained it. A frightened witness, an old clock, and a technical manual were not enough to overturn a jury's verdict if he could keep doubt scattered across the room. Judge Cross reviewed her notes. She asked whether either side had additional evidence. Marion looked at Caleb. This was the moment they had discussed, but now that it had arrived, it felt impossible. Caleb's mouth had gone dry. The courtroom seemed larger than before. The distance between his chair and the witness stand felt longer than the distance from Briar Creek to the prison. Ruth placed a hand over his. She did not tell him he had to do it. That helped him stand. The movement was small, but the courtroom noticed. Caleb rose beside the defense table. Roland Vance turned. Caleb asked the judge for permission to put one question to Owen Marlowe. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Vance was on his feet immediately. He objected that Caleb was a child, not counsel. He said allowing the boy to participate would turn a serious legal proceeding into emotional theater. He warned that grief was not evidence, and sympathy could not replace procedure. He spoke as though he were protecting the dignity of the court. But Caleb watched his jaw tighten. The prosecutor was afraid. Judge Cross called for silence. She looked at Marion, then at the attorney assisting the Turners, then at Caleb. She asked whether the proposed question had been reviewed. Marion confirmed that it had. She explained that Caleb's question concerned the witness's established business routine and would not require legal argument. Vance objected again. Judge Cross stopped him. She said the purpose of the hearing was to determine whether a man had been imprisoned under a materially false timeline. If a relevant question had been overlooked because the person who thought of it happened to be 10 years old, the court would not protect its pride by refusing to hear it. She allowed Caleb one line of inquiry. No speech. No argument. Only the question. Caleb stepped toward the witness stand. The microphone stood above his mouth. A deputy retrieved a small wooden platform from beside the clerk's desk and placed it beneath his feet. The sight of the boy standing on that box changed something in the room. For 2 years, adults with badges, titles, degrees, and authority had controlled Silas Turner's fate. Now his son needed a wooden step simply to be tall enough for them to hear him. Caleb looked at Owen. The old man could not hold his gaze. Caleb did not ask about the timestamp. He did not ask about the camera manual. He did not ask whether the rooster clock had been accurate. Instead, he asked what time Marlowe's Corner Market normally closed on Sunday nights. Owen blinked. The question was so ordinary that his prepared fear had nowhere to go. He answered automatically. 9 o'clock. Caleb asked whether Owen usually counted the register before closing or after closing. Vance rose. He objected that Caleb had been allowed one question, not a cross-examination. Judge Cross looked at Marion. Marion explained that the question was part of the same line of inquiry concerning store closing routine. The judge allowed Caleb to continue, but warned him to remain focused. Caleb asked again. Owen said he counted the register after closing. Caleb asked whether he turned the sign on the front door to closed before beginning the count. Owen's fingers tightened around the edge of the witness chair. He said yes. Caleb looked at the enlarged security photograph displayed beside the judge. His voice trembled, but he did not stop. He asked why, if the robbery had happened at 8:18, the photograph showed the closed sign already turned, the mop bucket pulled out, the bank deposit bag placed beside the register, and Owen performing the tasks he had just admitted he only did after the store closed at 9. No one moved. The question was not loud. It carried no accusation. That made it more powerful. Caleb was not asking Owen to understand machinery. He was asking him to remember the ordinary rhythm of his own life. Owen turned toward the image. For 2 years, everyone had directed his attention toward the robber. The coat, the shoulders, the height, the uneven walk. He had stared at the figure so often that the rest of the image had become invisible. Now he saw the store. He saw the sign. He saw the deposit bag. He saw the mop. He saw himself standing behind the counter in the familiar posture he used every Sunday after locking the door. Something changed in his face. Vance saw it and stood again. He argued that the question was misleading. He said routines could change. He said Owen might have closed early. He said the defense was manipulating an elderly witness through emotional details. His words came faster now. Too fast. Owen raised one hand. The gesture was weak, but it stopped the prosecutor. He said he remembered the mop. His voice was barely above a whisper. The courtroom leaned closer. Owen remembered pulling it from the storage area because the floor near the drink cooler had been sticky. He remembered the handle falling against the freezer after the robber left, making a hollow sound that startled him. He remembered turning the sign to closed. He remembered preparing the bank deposit. He remembered looking at the rooster clock because his wife had once trained him never to leave cash in the store after 9. Then he looked more closely at the clock in the photograph. The color left his face. Owen said Silas had repaired that clock. He said it had been keeping accurate time. He said he had moved the hands forward on the morning of March 10th because of daylight saving time. He remembered complaining about losing an hour. He remembered checking the rooster clock several times during the day because he did not trust himself to have adjusted it correctly. Judge Cross asked him directly whether the robbery had occurred before or after the store's normal closing time. Owen began to cry. After, he said. The word fell into the courtroom like a stone into still water. The robbery happened after 9. Marion stood and requested permission to display the enlarged photograph beside the certified records. The judge allowed it. The timestamp in the corner read 8:18 p.m. The rooster clock showed approximately 9:18. The emergency call was received at 9:22. Silas's access card had been scanned 13 miles away at 9:07:43. The church receipt placed him at St. Bartholomew's until 8:46. The camera manual confirmed that the recorder did not automatically update for daylight saving time. What had once seemed like disconnected details now aligned with painful precision. The camera was 1 hour slow. The robbery happened at 9:18. Silas Turner could not have been there. For 2 years, the prosecution had treated the camera timestamp as the strongest evidence in the case. It had been the weakest clock in the entire story. Owen lowered his head and apologized. At first, no one knew whether he was speaking to Silas, Caleb, Ruth, or the judge. Then he turned toward the defense table. He told Silas he was sorry. He said fear had convinced him that uncertainty was safer than truth. He admitted Vance's office had warned him about lawsuits, insurance problems, and public blame if his memory changed. No one had ordered him to lie. They had only made honesty feel dangerous. Silas did not answer. His face remained still, but tears filled his eyes. The truth he had repeated for 2 years was finally being spoken by someone the court had always considered worthy of belief. Roland Vance attempted to recover. He argued that Owen's renewed memory had been influenced by Caleb's questions. He said the wall clock could still have been inaccurate. He insisted that the court should not overturn a jury verdict based on an emotional reconstruction of store routine. Judge Cross asked whether his office had verified the security recorder's time settings before the original trial. Vance said the footage had been authenticated. The judge repeated the question. Had anyone verified the clock? Vance began explaining that the timestamp had been accepted by investigators. Judge Cross interrupted. She asked whether his office had compared the 8:18 timestamp with the 9:22 emergency call. Vance said trauma could explain a delayed report. She asked whether his office had investigated the access card scan at 9:07. He said the scan did not prove Silas personally used the card. Judge Cross asked whether the prosecution had presented any evidence that someone else possessed it. Vance had no answer. She asked whether the defense had received enlarged stills, clearly showing the rooster clock. Vance said the photographs had been available in the evidence file. The words harmed him more than he realized. Available. The truth had been available. The wall clock had been visible. The 911 record had existed. The access scan had existed. The daylight saving time change had been public knowledge. None of it had been hidden. It had simply been treated as less important than the story Vance wanted the jury to believe. Judge Cross recessed the hearing. The courtroom erupted the moment she left. Reporters rushed into the hallway. People spoke over one another. Deputies tried to keep the aisles clear. Ruth remained seated, one hand pressed over her mouth. Marion gathered the papers carefully, though her fingers shook. Caleb stepped down from the wooden platform. The adrenaline left him so quickly that his knees nearly failed. Then Silas called his name. Caleb turned. For the first time in 2 years, there was no glass between them. A deputy allowed Silas to move closer while the court remained in recess. Father and son stood only a few feet apart, both uncertain what the rules permitted. Silas reached out his hand. Caleb took it. The hand felt thinner than he remembered, but it was warm. Silas looked at his son with pride, gratitude and pain so deep that no single expression could hold all of it. He did not say Caleb had saved him. That would have placed too much weight on a child already carrying more than he should. He only said Caleb had listened. Caleb understood. His father had taught him that every broken thing left a trace. Caleb had simply refused to stop searching for it. When Judge Cross returned, The courtroom rose again. Her expression was controlled, but her voice carried a different weight. She reviewed the evidence slowly. The original prosecution had relied on a robbery time of 8:18 p.m. That time came solely from an unverified security camera timestamp. The recorder had not been adjusted after daylight saving time. The store's wall clock showed approximately 9:18. The witness's established closing routine supported a post-9 o'clock robbery. The emergency call at 9:22 supported that timeline. The access card record placed Silas Turner more than 13 miles away at 9:07. The discrepancy was not minor. It destroyed the prosecution's timeline. Judge Cross said the original jury had never been given the opportunity to consider the corrected time. The defense attorney had failed to investigate material evidence. The prosecution had presented the camera timestamp as objective truth without confirming its accuracy. Then she looked directly at Silas. She said the conviction could not stand. Ruth folded forward as if the strength holding her upright for 2 years had suddenly been removed. Marion caught her before she slipped from the bench. Caleb stared at the judge. He heard the words, but his mind could not immediately make them real. The conviction was vacated. Silas Turner was to be released from custody, while the state determined whether any lawful prosecution could continue without the false timeline. Judge Cross added that given the corrected evidence and the absence of reliable identification, the court saw no legitimate basis for holding him further. For 2 years, Silas had measured his life by prison bells, meal schedules, locked doors, visiting hours, and lights-out commands. Now a judge told him he could go home. Silas closed his eyes. A tear moved down his face. The courtroom began to react, but Judge Cross raised her hand. She was not finished. She said the hearing had revealed failures too serious to be treated as an isolated mistake. The prosecution had relied on technical evidence without verifying it. Contradictory records had been dismissed. A poor defendant's alibi had been treated as an inconvenience rather than a constitutional obligation. She ordered that the Attorney General's office receive the full record of the case. She also requested an independent review of other convictions prosecuted by Roland Vance, in which disputed surveillance timestamps had served as central evidence. The color drained from Vance's face. There was the consequence he had not prepared for. For years, he had built his reputation on clean timelines, decisive prosecutions, and cameras he claimed could not lie. Now those same timelines would be reopened. The evidence he had used to close doors would be used to open files. His career would not be destroyed by a political rival. It would be destroyed by the question he had been too arrogant to ask. The courtroom adjourned. Outside, reporters crowded the courthouse steps. Cameras flashed as Silas emerged beside Ruth, Caleb, and Marion. The late afternoon sky stretched above them without bars, concrete, or razor wire. Silas stopped walking. He looked upward. Caleb watched his father study the open sky, as if it were another kind of clock, too wide to measure and too beautiful to trust immediately. Reporters shouted questions. Did he forgive the prosecutor? Would he sue the county? How did it feel to be free? Was Caleb a genius? Silas did not answer at first. Then he said, the truth had been there from the beginning. His family should never have needed a child to find what trained adults had refused to examine. It was not the triumphant statement the reporters expected. It was more powerful than triumph. It was an indictment. That evening, Silas did not return to the home he remembered. The old house was gone. Turner Clockworks was gone. The workbench, the shelves, the clocks, and the faded sign had been sold or scattered. Freedom returned him to a world that had continued moving without him. He went instead to the narrow room behind the laundromat. Ruth opened the door. For a moment, Silas stood among the boxes, the folding chair, Caleb's small cot, and the machines vibrating through the wall. No one knew what to say. Caleb had imagined his father's return 1,000 times. He had imagined laughter, celebration, and the instant restoration of everything the conviction had taken. But justice did not rewind time. It only stopped the lie from taking more. Silas placed his small bag of prison belongings on the floor. Then he noticed the brass travel clock with the cracked face sitting beside Caleb's bed. Caleb had kept it running. Silas picked it up carefully and held it near his ear. The ticking was uneven. Still alive. He looked at Caleb and smiled. It was the first smile his son had seen that didn't have prison glass behind it. but freedom would not erase what had happened. Roland Vance's downfall was only beginning. Owen Marlowe still had to face the cost of his fear. Ruth still carried 2 years of exhaustion inside her. Silas had returned home, but part of him remained trapped in schedules, locked doors, and memories no judge could vacate. And Caleb, now praised by the same town that had once mocked him, would soon learn that being proven right did not automatically make the world kind. The case had ended. The healing had not. Freedom did not arrive like the ending of a story. That was the first thing Caleb learned after Silas Turner walked out of the courthouse and the people of Briar Creek began calling him innocent. For 2 years, the town had treated Silas as though a prison sentence could define the whole of a man. Then, in a single afternoon, the same town tried to reverse itself with headlines, handshakes, apologies, and expressions of shock. But a changed headline could not return a stolen year. It could not rebuild Turner Clockworks. It could not erase the nights Ruth had slept in a folding chair behind the laundromat. It could not give Caleb back the part of his childhood spent studying court transcripts beneath buzzing library lights. And it could not teach Silas how to feel free simply because a judge had opened a door. On his first night home, Silas barely slept. Caleb woke before dawn and saw his father sitting at the small table beside the brass travel clock. The room was dark, except for the weak light coming through the laundromat window. Outside, one of the machines had entered its final spin cycle, making the wall tremble gently. Silas held the clock near his ear. He wound it, listened, adjusted the crown, and listened again. The clock did not need that much attention. Caleb knew it. Silas knew it too. But after 2 years of guards, searches, count times, locked doors, and hands that were never allowed to move without permission, his fingers needed something delicate to trust him again. Caleb remained near the doorway. He wanted to say something comforting. He wanted to tell his father the nightmare was over. But Silas had taught him not to make claims that time had not proven. The nightmare had changed. That was not the same as ending. Silas noticed him and placed the clock on the table. He apologized for waking him. Caleb said the machines had done that. They both knew it was not true. For several minutes, father and son sat in silence. Then Silas asked whether Caleb had wound the clock every day. Caleb admitted that he had sometimes wound it twice because he was afraid it would stop. Silas examined the cracked glass face and smiled faintly. He said a clock did not need to look untouched in order to keep going. Sometimes the crack became part of the way a person remembered what it had survived. Caleb understood that his father was not only talking about the clock. Ruth understood too. She had spent 2 years surviving through movement. Motel rooms in the morning, laundry in the evening, prison visits on Wednesdays, bills sorted at night. She had lived so long without permission to collapse that when Silas returned, her body did not know how to rest. She continued waking before her alarm. She continued saving food as if the next meal were uncertain. Whenever an unfamiliar number appeared on her phone, fear moved through her before reason could catch it. At the grocery store, she checked prices twice and then checked them again. Silas once told her she did not have to work both jobs anymore. Ruth looked at him as though he had suggested she step from a moving train. She had learned not to trust stability. A conviction could take a husband. A landlord could take a shop. A town could take a reputation. A single mistake could take everything while insisting it was following procedure. Ruth loved that Silas had come home, but love did not automatically make her feel safe. Some nights, they sat beside one another without speaking. They did not need to explain the distance. It had been built from prison walls, collect calls, financial fear, and 2 years of learning how to live separately while still believing they belonged together. They began repairing that distance in small ways. Silas walked Ruth to the motel before sunrise. Ruth brought him coffee while he sorted through the few tools that remained. They ate dinner together even when no one had much appetite. Sometimes they spoke about what had happened. Sometimes they chose not to. Caleb watched them and learned that healing rarely arrived through one powerful conversation. More often, it came through ordinary acts repeated until the body began to believe the danger had passed. The town had its own way of reacting. Some people came to apologize. The first was an elderly woman whose mantel clock Silas had repaired years earlier. She arrived at the laundromat holding a pie and crying before Ruth opened the door. She admitted she had believed the news reports. She admitted she had stopped visiting the shop because she had been afraid of what neighbors might say. She did not ask Silas to tell her everything was fine. She simply said she had failed him. Silas accepted the pie. He did not immediately accept the apology. The woman seemed to understand. Others came with longer explanations. They said the evidence had looked convincing. They said everyone had trusted Roland Vance. They said no ordinary person could have known the camera was wrong. What they wanted was not forgiveness. They wanted relief from the discomfort of knowing they had chosen the easiest story. Ruth had little patience for those apologies. She listened when she felt able. When she did not, she closed the door. Silas never criticized her for it. He understood that forgiveness offered under pressure was only another form of surrender. At school, Caleb's world changed almost overnight. The same principal who had once advised him not to bring attention to his father's case called him into the office and said the entire school was proud. A teacher suggested holding an assembly in his honor. Children who had mocked him now wanted to sit beside him at lunch. One boy asked whether Caleb remembered him. Caleb remembered him perfectly. He remembered the toy clock placed on his desk. He remembered the joke about his father stealing time. He remembered the teacher looking away. The boy apologized. Not well. He said he had only repeated what other people were saying. Caleb looked at him and realized most cruelty traveled that way. It passed from one frightened or careless person to another, until no one felt responsible for carrying it. Caleb did not say they were friends again. He said they could start by being honest. That answer spread through the school before lunch. Some students began calling him the courtroom boy. Others called him the clock boy. Reporters called him a legal prodigy. A television producer called Ruth and offered to fly the family to New York for an interview. Another wanted to build an entire program around Caleb's question. Ruth refused most of them. The first time she agreed to a local interview, she regretted it almost immediately. The reporter repeatedly asked Caleb how it felt to be a hero. Caleb tried to explain that he had not wanted to become a hero. He had wanted his father to come home. The reporter asked whether Caleb planned to become a lawyer. Caleb said he was 10. The moment never appeared in the broadcast. Instead, the program used a dramatic photograph of him standing on the wooden platform beneath the courtroom microphone. The caption called him the boy who defeated a prosecutor. Silas switched off the television. He told Caleb that people liked stories with one hero and one villain because complicated truth made them uncomfortable. But no child should have needed to defeat anyone. The adults should have done their jobs before Caleb ever opened the first law book. Caleb asked whether he should stop speaking about the case. Silas said no. He should speak when the truth might help someone. But he should never let strangers convince him that his pain belonged to them. The formal dismissal of the charges came 3 weeks after the hearing. The document arrived in a thin white envelope. Ruth held it for nearly an hour before opening it. She had imagined that moment during sleepless nights, but the real paper seemed too light for what it carried. It contained several paragraphs of legal language and a few lines stating that the state would not continue prosecution. Case dismissed. Conviction vacated. No further basis for detention. Ruth read the words twice. Then she began laughing. The sound startled Caleb. It was not joy exactly. It was the sound of a body releasing pressure through whatever opening remained. Silas placed his hand on the document. For 2 years, the state had used paper to define him as guilty. Now another piece of paper admitted that the first one should never have existed. He did not smile. He asked Ruth to place the dismissal beside the cracked brass clock. The two objects remained together on the small table for weeks. Proof that the law had corrected itself. Proof that correction had come too late. While the Turner family tried to rebuild, Roland Vance tried to control the damage. He released a public statement claiming he respected the court's decision and remained committed to the integrity of the justice system. He described the incorrect timestamp as an unusual technical problem that could not reasonably have been anticipated during the original prosecution. He did not mention the 911 call. He did not mention the access card record. He did not mention the photograph that had been available from the beginning. And he did not mention the pressure placed on Owen Marlowe before the hearing. For a few days, the explanation worked. Vance still had supporters. Some insisted that one mistake should not destroy a career. Others said he had acted in good faith. His campaign team attempted to move forward, quietly removing references to the Turner conviction from speeches and promotional material. Then the independent review found another case. 6 years earlier, a warehouse worker named Thomas Reed had been accused of helping burglarize an electronics store. Surveillance footage appeared to place a vehicle similar to his near the building shortly after midnight. Reed claimed he had been inside a distribution center at the time, but the prosecution argued that another employee could have used his identification badge. The camera timestamp had never been independently verified. Reed had accepted a plea bargain after his public defender warned that juries trusted video more than testimony. He had served 3 years. A review of the recording system showed that its internal clock was 27 minutes fast. The corrected timeline supported Reed's workplace alibi. His conviction was reopened. Then came another case. A young mother had been convicted of participating in a pharmacy theft, based partly on video from a neighboring parking lot. She had insisted she was collecting her child from an emergency clinic across town. Clinic records appeared to conflict with the timestamp, but Vance's office dismissed them as potentially inaccurate. The camera had changed time zones after a software reset. Another case involved a gas station robbery and a recorder that had lost power several days before the crime. When it restarted, its clock reverted to a default time. Investigators never checked. Not every reviewed conviction collapsed. Some remained supported by fingerprints, witness identification, or confessions. But enough cases showed the same habit. Vance's office treated technical evidence as absolute when it helped the prosecution. When conflicting records supported a defendant, they were labeled confusion, coincidence, or manipulation. The problem was no longer one broken camera. It was a philosophy. Roland Vance had not always needed to invent facts. He had simply decided which facts deserved authority. The newspapers that once praised his decisiveness began printing detailed timelines of his cases. Donors stopped returning calls. Political allies who had attended his fundraisers appeared on television, discussing the importance of accountability. His campaign for state judge collapsed within 2 months. The state bar opened an inquiry. The attorney general requested internal emails and case files. Former employees began speaking anonymously about pressure to preserve conviction rates. One assistant admitted that prosecutors were rewarded for closing cases quickly and discouraged from exploring alternative timelines once an arrest had been made. Vance resigned before the investigation ended. In his resignation statement, he claimed he did not want his personal situation to distract from the work of justice. Marion read the sentence aloud while sitting at Ruth's small table. She laughed until her eyes watered. Silas did not laugh. He said powerful men often called the truth a distraction when it finally entered the room without permission. The Turner case became known across the state. But Silas wanted less attention, not more. He struggled to enter crowded places. He disliked people standing behind him. He ate quickly, then apologized when he noticed Ruth watching. He woke before sunrise and sometimes folded his blankets with prison precision before remembering no one would inspect them. He visited the old Turner Clockwork storefront only once. Caleb found him standing across the street. The faded blue door had been painted gray. The window now displayed advertisements for tax preparation and payday loans. Nothing remained of the clocks, the workbench, or the quiet afternoons Caleb had spent sorting brass screws beside his father. Silas stared for a long time. Caleb asked whether he wanted the shop back. Silas shook his head. He said the strange thing about losing a place was that the walls continued standing as though they had not witnessed anything. A man could lose years, customers, reputation, and sleep, while the bricks remained available for someone else's sign. Caleb asked whether they would ever open another shop. Silas did not answer immediately. He looked toward the public library at the end of the street. Then he said perhaps, "Not there." Some rooms held the wrong silence. The new shop began as an idea Marion refused to let disappear. She found a narrow vacant property beside the Briar Creek Public Library. It had once been a used bookstore. The ceiling leaked near the back, one window would not open, and the floorboards carried years of dust. But morning light filled the front room. The location felt right. On one side stood the library where Caleb had learned to read the law. On the other would stand the place where Silas repaired time. The family did not yet have enough money. A civil suit against the county would take years. Donations had arrived after the hearing, but Ruth distrusted sudden generosity. Some people who contributed had not offered a single meal during the 2 years Silas was imprisoned. Silas told her help did not become useless, simply because guilt had brought it. They could accept the wood, paint, tools, and shelves without pretending every motive was pure. A legal foundation created a small recovery grant. St. Bartholomew's Church organized a fundraiser. The church custodian who had seen Silas on the night of the robbery donated several old workbenches. A retired carpenter repaired the floor. Marion arrived carrying boxes of broken courthouse clocks and announced that no new repair shop should open without enough unfinished work to create immediate regret. They cleaned the space together. Ruth scrubbed the windows. Caleb sorted donated tools. Silas repaired shelves, then repaired them again because he did not trust the first attempt. Some volunteers worked quietly. Others apologized while holding paintbrushes. Ruth allowed them to speak. She did not promise absolution. Above the entrance, Silas painted the new name by hand. Turner & Son Clockworks. Caleb stared at the sign for so long that Silas asked whether the spelling was wrong. Caleb said his name did not belong there. His father was the real clockmaker. Silas looked genuinely offended. He told Caleb that without him, there would be no shop and no clockmaker to reopen it. Caleb had kept the work alive when every adult around him had declared it finished. Below the shop name, Caleb painted a smaller sentence. "We restore what time almost took away." Silas complained that it sounded too poetic for a repair shop. Ruth cried when she saw it. Then Silas stopped complaining. Before the shop opened, Owen Marlowe came to see them. He did not arrive with reporters. He did not come during the fundraiser or stand where others could watch him apologize. He went to the laundromat on a quiet afternoon, carrying a cardboard box. Ruth saw him through the glass door and became still. For 2 years, Owen had been presented as the innocent victim and Silas as the dangerous man who had harmed him. Now Owen stood outside looking smaller than the box in his hands. Ruth considered refusing to let him enter. Silas told her it was her choice. That mattered. For so long, other people had controlled what happened to their family. Even a small choice deserved respect. Ruth opened the door. Owen stepped inside. He did not begin with excuses. He did not describe his fear of the robber or explain how Vance's office had influenced him. He did not ask Silas to understand how difficult the situation had been. He said he was sorry. He admitted that before the hearing, Vance's assistant had warned him about lawsuits, insurance investigations, and public blame. He admitted that no one had ordered him to lie. They had only shown him the consequences of remembering correctly. Owen had chosen fear. Silas had paid for it. Owen placed the box on the table. Inside was the red rooster clock. Its hands had been removed and wrapped in paper. Dust covered the chipped wooden body. Without the hands, the pale face looked strangely empty. Owen said he could no longer keep it in the store. Every time he looked at it, he saw the truth he had refused to face. But the clock had belonged to his wife, and he could not throw it away. He asked Silas to repair it one more time. Not for Marlowe's corner market, for his wife's grave. Ruth looked at Silas. Caleb looked at the clock. Silas remained silent for a long time. People often imagine forgiveness as a sudden, beautiful decision. Caleb learned that day that real forgiveness could feel more like opening the back of a damaged clock. A person did not know what condition the mechanism was in until the cover came off. Some parts might be cleaned, some might need replacement, some might never work as before. Finally, Silas agreed to repair it. Owen released a breath. Then Silas said he would charge him a fair price. Not more because of what happened. Not less because of guilt. Fair. Owen nodded immediately. He seemed relieved to pay. The price acknowledged that repair required labor and that the past had carried a cost. Before leaving, Owen apologized to Ruth. She told him she was not ready to forgive him. He lowered his head and said he understood. That was the first moment Caleb believed Owen's remorse might be real. True remorse did not demand comfort from the people it had harmed. Silas and Caleb repaired the rooster clock in the back of the new shop before opening day. They placed it beneath the workbench lamp. Silas removed the back while Caleb arranged the screws on dark velvet. The movement was dirty. One gear had worn unevenly. The minute hand had been bent during removal. Dust had gathered around the spring. The clock had not been destroyed. It had been neglected. Caleb watched his father clean each part. For the first time since prison, Silas's movements became fully steady. His hands remembered a language the rest of him was still relearning. Caleb polished the gear teeth. Silas adjusted the spring. Together, they realigned the hands. When Silas returned the movement to its case and wound it, nothing happened. Caleb's heart sank. Silas waited. He moved the pendulum gently. The clock ticked once, then again. The rhythm strengthened. Ruth stood in the doorway. Marian had stopped sorting boxes in the front room. All four listened. The sound was soft, steady. No one claimed the clock had redeemed the suffering. A repaired object could not return 2 years. But its ticking carried a meaning none of them needed to explain. The truth had been there all along. It had waited in the background until someone looked closely enough to hear it. Opening day arrived 1 year after Silas's release. Caleb wore a clean shirt. Ruth placed flowers in the window. Marian brought a cake that leaned to one side and insisted that perfectly straight cakes should never be trusted. At 9 o'clock, Silas stood beside the front door. For 2 years, other people had controlled every door he entered and left. Prison doors opened by command. Courtroom doors opened under guard. Even the laundromat room belonged to someone else. This door belonged to him. He turned the sign to open. The bell rang cleanly. For several minutes, no one came. Then an elderly woman entered with a pocket watch wrapped in a handkerchief. A church deacon followed with a mantel clock and an apology he could not say without looking at the floor. A young mother brought a cheap plastic clock shaped like a sunflower. She admitted it would cost less to buy a new one, but it had belonged to her grandmother. Silas accepted every repair with the same attention. By noon, the shelves were full. The town had not become perfect. Some people came because they were sorry. Some came because the Turners were now part of a story everyone wanted to stand beside. Some claimed they had always doubted the conviction, though Ruth remembered their silence clearly. She let them enter. She did not let them rewrite the past. Owen collected the rooster clock 2 days later. Silas placed it on the counter between them. The hands now moved accurately. The chipped paint remained. Silas had offered to restore the wooden body, but Owen asked him not to. He wanted the cracks to remain visible. He paid the full price. Before leaving, he looked at Caleb and said, he hoped the boy became whatever kind of man he wanted to become, not what strangers expected after the hearing. Caleb did not know how to respond. He nodded. Owen carried the clock away with both hands. Later, Silas framed an enlarged section of the original security photograph and hung it above the workbench. He cropped out the robber. He removed the counter and most of the store. Only the rooster clock and the timestamp remained. The timestamp read 8:18. The clock showed 9:18. Customers often asked why he kept an image connected to such a painful period. Silas always answered the same way. The truth was there from the beginning. The independent review of Vance's cases continued for more than a year. Thomas Reed's conviction was overturned. The young mother accused in the pharmacy case received a new trial, and the charges were dismissed after investigators confirmed her clinic alibi. Another man's sentence was reduced after hidden timeline inconsistencies undermined the prosecution's version of events. The Turner Review, as newspapers began calling it, did not prove every convicted person innocent. It did something more important and less dramatic. It forced the county to look again. New rules required independent verification of digital timestamps before trial. Surveillance systems had to be checked for time zone errors, power resets, and daylight saving time settings. Prosecutors could no longer present electronic time data as unquestionable without documenting how it had been verified. Marian became involved in a small legal aid project reviewing evidence in old cases. She complained constantly about the workload while arriving early every morning. Caleb continued visiting her at the library. He read appeals, evidence standards, and cases involving mistaken identification. He did not study because he believed the law was pure. He had seen what happened when law was handled carelessly. He studied because the law was too powerful to be left only to people who enjoyed hearing themselves speak. No one forced him to decide whether he would become a lawyer. Silas told him he had already spent enough of his childhood solving adult failures. So Caleb returned to school, repaired clocks on Saturdays, played basketball badly, and sometimes went entire days without thinking about a courtroom. That was its own kind of victory. 2 years after Silas's release, Judge Helena Cross visited Turner & Son Clockworks just before closing. She came alone, without robes, staff, or cameras. In her hands was a small wooden desk clock. Silas welcomed her politely. Caleb looked up from his homework. Judge Cross explained that the clock had belonged to her father. It had stopped years earlier, but she had kept it on her desk because some things remained important even when they no longer moved. She placed it on the counter. Then she looked at Caleb. She told him that courtrooms were filled with trained voices, confident voices, expensive voices, and voices accustomed to being obeyed. But during Silas's hearing, the smallest voice in the room had asked the clearest question. Caleb lowered his eyes. Praise still made him uncomfortable. Silas rescued him by asking the judge what seemed to be wrong with the clock. Judge Cross smiled and admitted she did not know. She said she had learned not to assume. After she left, Caleb asked his father whether justice had finally been done. Silas turned the judge's clock over in his hands. He listened to the silence inside it. Then he said, justice had begun. Caleb understood the difference. Done would mean the years returned. Done would mean Turner Clockworks never closed. Done would mean Ruth never slept in a chair. Caleb was never mocked. Owen never hid behind fear. And Vance never built a career by transforming uncertainty into guilt. Begun meant something smaller. Silas was home. The lie had been named. Several forgotten cases had been reopened. People were checking the clocks. After great harm, beginning was sometimes the only honest miracle available. That evening, Caleb and Silas closed the shop together. Ruth had gone ahead to prepare dinner. Marion had left a stack of papers on the counter with a note demanding coffee before anyone asked her to read them. The library lights glowed next door. Caleb turned off the front display. Around him, dozens of clocks continued ticking. They did not tick together. Some moved half a second ahead. Some fell slightly behind. Some sounded deep and formal. Others clicked softly. Yet each was being watched, adjusted, and cared for. The sound had once filled Caleb's childhood. Then it disappeared. Now it had returned. Not unchanged. Nothing truly returned unchanged. Silas stood beside him and listened. He said people often believed time only took things away. Youth, homes, chances, people we loved. But time also revealed. It wore paint from lies. It loosened what had been nailed shut. It carried buried details forward until someone patient enough noticed them. Caleb looked at the framed photograph. 8:18 in the corner, 9:18 on the wall. One wrong hour. On paper, it had looked like a technical mistake, a forgotten setting, a minor oversight. But that hour had taken a father from his son, a husband from his wife, a shop from its owner, and trust from a family that had done nothing to deserve losing it. Caleb had learned that small details were never small when powerful people built entire stories on top of them. A wrong hour could become a prison sentence. A flipped sign could become a clue. A frightened witness could become part of a lie. A child's question could become a key. And a clock no one bothered to examine could become the most honest witness in the room. Years later, people would still ask Caleb how he noticed what trained investigators, lawyers, and prosecutors had missed. He never liked the question. It made the answer sound like magic. There had been no magic. There had been prison visits, unpaid bills, library dust, pencil marks, sleepless nights, Marion's patience, Ruth's strength, Silas's lessons, and one child who refused to accept that a closed case meant a correct one. So Caleb answered simply. He noticed because his father had taught him to look at what everyone else dismissed. That was all. And that was everything. Injustice does not always arrive wearing a cruel face. Sometimes it arrives through hurry, through convenience, through a prosecutor who wants a clean victory, a lawyer too exhausted to ask one more question, a witness too frightened to correct the story, and a town too comfortable believing that the person closest to suspicion must be guilty. Justice does not always return with thunder. Sometimes it returns through an old woman reading records at a library table. Sometimes it returns through a mother who keeps standing after the world has taken almost everything. Sometimes it returns through a man who still believes broken things deserve care. And sometimes it returns through a 10-year-old boy standing on a wooden platform, asking an ordinary question that powerful adults were too certain to consider. The story of Silas and Caleb Turner was never proof that pain always carried a purpose. Pain did not become good simply because someone survived it. Nor was it proof that the system always corrected itself. Systems rarely correct themselves without people willing to disturb their comfort. The lesson was more honest than that. Never let confidence replace truth. Never allow authority to make you ashamed of asking a simple question. And never ignore a small detail, because powerful people are in a hurry to move on. Because somewhere, behind the person everyone is staring at, there may be a clock still pointing toward the truth. And sometimes, one honest question is enough to make the entire room finally hear it.
I kept this house standing for 20 years because I believe my boys mind their way back.
She had nothing left to fight with.
There is nothing left to sell, no one left to call, and no way left to fight them.
Then 3 black cars stopped outside her gate.
She spent 20 years losing everything because of our family's lies. No one takes her home today.
3 men walked toward the house.
Our grandfather took us away from her when we were children, then made us believe she had forgotten us. We came back because she deserves the truth. This was in my hand when I was 8 years old. She carried me through floodwater because I could not breathe, and she never let go of me.
Celeste recognized it before she recognized him.
I know that flashlight, but that little boy was only 8 years old. Who are you?
They were not sent by the bank.
The bank did not send us. I am Owen, and we found every letter you wrote after they took us away from you.
They brought 73 hidden letters.
There were 73 letters hidden in our grandfather's private study. Birthday cards, Christmas you sent us was kept from us.
Every letter proved she never stopped loving them.
I wrote to all 3 of you, every birthmas, every time it stormed.
The brothers had believed she abandoned them.
We were children, and they told us you had moved on without us. For 20 years, I thought you had let us go because we were too difficult to love.
But their grandfather
never left us.
had stolen the truth.
He lied to us because he thought money could replace the woman who made us feel safe for the first time. We found every letter you ever sent us hidden in our grandfather's private study. For 20 years, he made us believe you abandoned us, and he made you believe we forgot you.
To understand why those letters mattered so much, it was necessary to go back to the winter of 2004, when Celeste Morgan was 46 years old and had almost convinced herself that God had forgotten the prayer she had whispered for half her life. Celeste lived in a small, weathered house near the edge of Pine Hollow, Tennessee, where the road narrowed into old trees and rusted mailboxes. The house had belonged to her Aunt Evelyn, a woman who believed that every home should keep a light burning near the front door in case someone needed help after dark. Evelyn had been gone for years, but Celeste kept the habit. No matter how tired she was, no matter how high the electric bill became, the porch light always came on at sunset. Celeste worked before sunrise in the laundry department at Pine Hollow Memorial Hospital. Most people never saw her there. They only saw clean sheets folded in perfect stacks, fresh towels delivered to rooms, and uniforms pressed before the next shift began. At night, she cleaned the county archive building, where old records slept beneath dust and locked glass cabinets. Her days were long, her income was small, and her hands were always dry from soap and bleach. Still, Celeste gave what she could. She brought extra food to the church pantry. She volunteered twice a month at a weekend program for children waiting to be placed in foster homes. She kept a box of winter coats in her hallway closet. Most of them donated. Some bought one at a time from thrift stores after payday. The children who came through the program knew her as the woman who remembered their favorite snacks, who never forced them to speak before they were ready, and who understood that a child could be loud, rude, withdrawn, or angry without being bad. Years earlier, Celeste had lost 2 pregnancies. The second loss had nearly taken her life. After that, doctors told her that another pregnancy would be too dangerous. She had spent months grieving a future that no longer seemed possible, then years learning to live with the empty space it left behind. But she never stopped wanting to be a mother. She simply stopped saying it out loud. One rainy evening in November, After 2 exhausting shifts and a bus ride home, Celeste unlocked her front door and found a message blinking on her answering machine. It was from Cassandra Reed, a social worker who had known Celeste through the weekend foster program. Cassandra had a problem that could not wait until morning. 3 brothers had lost both parents in a highway accident several weeks earlier. Their father, Daniel Vale, had been driving home with his wife after visiting family in another county when a delivery truck crossed the center line during a storm. Daniel and his wife died at the scene. Their son survived because they were asleep in the back seat. The oldest boy was 14-year-old Owen. The middle brother, Mateo, was 11. The youngest, Silas, was 8. In the weeks after the funeral, the boys had been moved from emergency placement to emergency placement. One family agreed to take Owen, but not the younger 2. Another said Mateo was too angry. A third said Silas's silence made them uncomfortable. The brothers had already begun to understand a terrible truth. People were willing to help them only if helping did not cost too much. The state was preparing to separate them. Cassandra knew Celeste's home was small. She knew Celeste did not have much money. She also knew Celeste had completed emergency caregiver training, passed the required background checks, and had been waiting for a placement that needed someone willing to care for children who had already learned not to trust promises. Celeste called Cassandra back before taking off her coat. By midnight, she had cleared the guest room, spread blankets across the old sofa, and pulled every extra pillow from the linen closet. She cooked a pot of chicken soup, though she had no idea whether any of the boys would eat it. Then she turned on the porch light and waited. The boys arrived after 1 in the morning. Owen entered first. He was tall for his age, thin in the way children become thin when stress replaces appetite, and he carried a backpack that looked too small to contain a life. Mateo followed with his hands clenched inside the sleeves of an oversized hoodie. Silas came last, holding a plastic grocery bag filled with folded paper stars. Celeste noticed immediately that none of them looked around the house with curiosity. They looked around it like prisoners measuring a cell. They had learned not to get comfortable. Celeste did not ask them to call her anything. She did not tell them everything would be fine. She did not ask them to smile for the social worker or say thank you for the soup. She simply told them there was food in the kitchen, clean blankets in the bedrooms, and enough room for all 3 of them to stay together. That first night, Owen slept in his clothes with his backpack under his arm. Mateo refused to eat until nearly 3 in the morning, when he thought nobody was watching. Silas sat by the window, folding and unfolding the same paper star until the corners tore. Celeste did not force him to stop. The first weeks were difficult in ways that no foster training manual could fully explain. Owen hid food under his bed: bread, crackers, fruit cups, even half a sandwich wrapped in a napkin. At first, Celeste found it and almost scolded him. Then she remembered something she had heard from another foster parent years earlier. Children who have been moved too often do not hoard food because they are greedy. They hoard it because they do not believe breakfast is guaranteed. So Celeste placed a small basket in the pantry and told the boys it belonged to them. It was always stocked with crackers, fruit, cereal bars, and anything else she could afford. Nobody had to ask permission to take from it. Nobody had to hide it. Owen did not trust the basket at first. But after several weeks, the food under his bed began to disappear. Mateo struggled differently. He carried his grief like a match held too close to gasoline. A wrong look at school could set him off. A careless joke about his parents could make him swing before he had time to think. He had been suspended twice before Christmas, and once after, not because he enjoyed hurting people, but because anger was the only feeling he knew how to express without falling apart. Celeste did not excuse what he did, but she refused to define him by it. She introduced him to George Bell, a retired firefighter who ran a small woodworking program for boys at the community center. George had lost a son in the military years earlier and understood the language of grief that came out through broken things. At the workshop, Mateo learned to sand rough edges until they became smooth. He learned to measure twice before cutting once. He learned that strength could be useful without being dangerous. The first thing he made was a crooked wooden shelf for Celeste's kitchen. She hung it anyway. Silas remained quiet. For almost 2 months, he spoke only with his eyes, his hands, and the paper stars he folded from scraps of newspaper, old schoolwork sheets, and grocery lists. He lined them on the windowsill of his room, then moved them to the dining table, then placed one beside Celeste's coffee mug each morning. She never asked what they meant. She only kept them safe. Celeste had 4 rules in her home. The first was that whenever possible, everyone ate together. The second was that nobody would be punished for telling the truth. The third was that anger could be taken outside, written down, cried out, or worked through, but it could not be used to wound someone else. The fourth rule was the most important. The porch light stayed on until everyone was home. At first, the boys thought the rule was strange. Then they began to understand it. The porch light was not only for strangers, it was for Owen when he came home late from helping George fix a broken fence. It was for Mateo after detention. It was for Silas when he woke from nightmares and needed to stand on the porch steps, looking at something warm against the darkness. It was Celeste's way of telling them that no matter how difficult the day had been, there was still a place waiting for them. For a while, Pine Hollow watched from a distance. Some people were kind. The women at the church brought casseroles. George gave Mateo spare tools. A teacher at Silas's school quietly donated books with large pictures because she had noticed he liked to trace the drawings with his fingers. The woman at the grocery store began saving bruised apples for Celeste at a discount. But not everyone approved. Mabel Crew, who ran the weekly Pine Hollow Bulletin, had spent most of her life collecting other people's mistakes and turning them into public entertainment. She was the kind of woman who claimed she only cared about the community, while making sure every rumor reached the community before the truth did. Mabel began with questions that sounded harmless. She wondered aloud how a woman with 2 jobs could properly care for 3 boys. She asked why the county would place children in an old house with a leaking roof. She hinted that Celeste might be accepting foster payments for reasons that had nothing to do with love. The rumors spread because rumors always spread faster in places where people know each other's business, but rarely know each other's pain. Celeste heard them. She heard the whispers in grocery store aisles. She saw the looks when she walked into church with the boys. She noticed people growing quiet when she approached, but she did not fight every lie. She was too busy building a home. By spring, Owen had started helping her repair the back fence. He had a talent for fixing things without making a fuss about it. He could look at a loose hinge, a broken drawer, or a warped board, and somehow understand what it needed. Celeste began saving small amounts from every paycheck to buy materials. Owen gave up asking why she was spending money on a house that was barely standing and began helping her make it stronger. Mateo's grades improved, not because he suddenly became interested in school, but because George taught him how to take pride in learning something difficult. He started staying after class to work on math with a teacher who had once been afraid of him. He still had a temper, but now he knew anger did not have to decide who he became. Silas spoke for the first time on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Celeste had fallen asleep in the chair after cleaning the archive building overnight. The boys were in the kitchen, making grilled cheese sandwiches with more butter than necessary. Silas stood near the counter, watching smoke rise from a pan that had been left too long on the stove. Then he said one word. He said Celeste's name. Owen dropped the spatula. Mateo froze. Celeste woke so fast that she nearly knocked over her coffee. Silas looked embarrassed, as if he had broken something by speaking. But Celeste did not rush him. She simply smiled and told him she had heard him. That was enough. The real turning point came during the flood. In late January of 2006, Pine Hollow was hit by 3 days of relentless rain. The river rose. Roads vanished under brown water. Power lines fell across backyards. The town had seen storms before, but not like this. By the third night, the electricity in Celeste's house went out. The boys gathered in the living room under blankets, while rain hammered the roof. Water crept beneath the back door. The porch light flickered, dimmed, then went dark for the first time in years. Silas had always been afraid of storms after the accident that killed his parents. But that night, his fear became something worse. His breathing tightened. His chest began to rise and fall too fast. The inhaler he had been prescribed was nearly empty, and the nearest hospital was across several flooded roads. Celeste tried the phone. There was no signal. She tried her car. The engine turned once, then died. The volunteer fire station was less than a mile away, but between the house and the station was a stretch of road already covered in water. Mateo wanted to go. Owen wanted to carry Silas. Celeste knew none of them could manage it alone. So she wrapped Silas in blankets, gave Owen an old flashlight, and told Mateo to stay close behind them. Then she stepped out into the storm. The water was freezing. The wind cut through their clothes. At one point, Celeste slipped near a ditch hidden beneath the floodwater and nearly lost her footing. Owen grabbed her arm before she fell. Mateo held Silas tight against his chest, even though fear had made him shake from head to toe. They reached the fire station just before Silas's breathing became dangerously shallow. The volunteers got him to the hospital in a rescue truck. Doctors later said that the timing had mattered. Celeste spent the rest of the night sitting in a plastic chair beside Silas's hospital bed. Her shoes were still wet. Her hands were raw from cold. She had not slept in more than 20 hours. When Silas woke, he looked at her for a long time. Then he gave her a name that did not appear on any government document. He called her Mama Celeste. Not loudly, not perfectly, but clearly enough for Owen and Mateo to hear. Neither of the older boys said anything. They did not need to. From that day forward, the house on the edge of Pine Hollow was no longer a temporary placement. It was home. Owen carved a small wooden sign and hung it near the porch. It read, "The Morgan Home." Mateo built a narrow bench beneath the front window. Silas placed paper stars along the ledge, one for every night the porch light had stayed on. For the first time since their parents died, the boys began planning for the future. Owen talked about becoming a contractor. Mateo wanted to build furniture. Silas had started making little drawings of houses with yellow lights in the windows. Celeste began the paperwork to move from emergency placement to long-term guardianship. And then Alistair Vale arrived. He came in a black car with a driver, 2 attorneys, and the kind of quiet confidence that made people step aside before he asked them to. Alistair was the father of Daniel Vale, the boy's late father. He was also the founder of Vale Holdings, a regional construction company that had grown into a national corporation. For years, Alistair and Daniel had been estranged. Daniel had walked away from the family business after Alistair refused to accept the life he wanted. He had married a woman Alistair considered beneath the expectations of the Vale name. He had moved away, worked ordinary jobs, raised his sons without asking his father for money, and kept the boys far from a world built on appearances. When Daniel and his wife died, Alistair had been notified through legal channels, but at the time, he had chosen not to act. The boys were grieving. The situation was complicated, and Alistair did not want public attention around a family conflict he had spent years pretending did not exist. Then an insurance settlement connected to the accident began moving through probate court. The existence of 3 minor heirs became impossible for him to ignore. Suddenly, Alistair discovered the importance of family. He told the court that he could offer the boys stability, education, medical care, private tutors, and a financial future Celeste could never provide. His attorneys pointed to the house's old wiring, the repairs Celeste could not yet afford, and the fact that her emergency caregiver status had not been converted into permanent guardianship. They did not accuse Celeste of cruelty. They did something more devastating. They made love sound insufficient. Cassandra testified that the boys were attached to Celeste and that separating them from her could cause lasting harm. George spoke about Mateo's progress. Teachers described Owen's new confidence and Silas's return to speech. But under state rules, biological kinship carried weight, and Alistair's attorneys knew how to turn every weakness in Celeste's life into evidence that she could not compete. The judge did not say Celeste had failed. The judge said the boys would be placed with their grandfather for their future. To Celeste, the difference meant nothing. The day they left was colder than the night of the flood. Owen stood on the porch for a long time, staring at the sign he had made. Mateo kept wiping his face with the sleeve of his jacket, angry at himself for crying. Silas held the battered flashlight from the flood night against his chest. Celeste packed what the boys were allowed to bring. Most of it was not much. Clothes, school books, a few photographs, Mateo's first woodworking project, some paper stars. Before leaving, Owen slipped a folded piece of paper into the kitchen drawer. Celeste did not find it until later that night. It was a map of the house, drawn in pencil. The front porch was marked with a small yellow circle. Underneath it, Owen had written that they would remember where the light was. For a while, Celeste believed that promise would be enough. It was not. Alistair moved the boys into his estate outside Nashville. He told everyone that he was giving them a better life. But better, in his world, meant controlled. Owen was sent to a private academy that taught him how to speak in rooms full of powerful men. Mateo was placed in a strict boarding school after several angry outbursts. Silas was enrolled in a program designed to make him more polished, more composed, and less emotional. They were not physically abandoned, but they were emotionally managed. Whenever the boys asked about Celeste, Alistair gave them versions of the same story. He suggested that she had moved on. He implied that she had accepted the money the state had provided and chosen not to remain involved. He told them letters had not come because there was nothing to receive. At the same time, Celeste wrote. She wrote on birthdays. She wrote at Christmas. She wrote whenever she heard that a storm had passed through Nashville and wondered whether Silas still feared thunder. She wrote to Owen about home repairs. She wrote to Mateo about the old workshop tools George had left for him. She wrote to all 3 boys about the porch light. The letters never arrived. Mabel Crew made things worse in Pine Hollow. After the court ruling, she wrote a carefully worded article suggesting Celeste had lost the boys because the county had concerns about her care. She never directly accused Celeste of abuse. She did not need to. She used phrases like troubling circumstances, and questions about stability. In a small town, vague words could destroy a reputation more effectively than a direct lie. Celeste lost her evening cleaning job at the archive after a board member complained that the county should avoid controversy. Some parents stopped letting their children attend the weekend foster program if Celeste was there. The church pantry, where she had volunteered for years, quietly asked her to take a break. The woman who had opened her home to 3 grieving boys became someone people crossed the street to avoid. Still, every night, she turned on the porch light. Years passed. The roof was repaired one patch at a time. The garden behind the house grew wild, then was cut back, then grew again. The boys became men. Owen learned the business Alistair wanted him to learn, but he never became blind to what power could do. Matteo became a skilled furniture maker and later founded a company that hired young people leaving foster care. Silas, who had once folded paper stars in silence, became a documentary editor. He built stories from old footage, forgotten letters, and details other people missed. They stayed close to one another because they had learned early that brothers were not simply relatives. They were witnesses. As adults, they began asking harder questions about their childhood. Owen remembered the basket of food in Celeste's pantry. Matteo remembered the shelf he had built. Silas remembered the warm circle of porch light reflected in floodwater. None of those memories matched the version of Celeste that Alistair had described. When Alistair died, the brothers inherited more money than they had ever wanted, and more answers than they were prepared to face. Among the documents in his private study was a locked cabinet. The key was found in a sealed envelope addressed to the estate executor. Inside were the letters, dozens of them, some still unopened. There were also notes from Alistair's staff, records showing that correspondence had been intercepted, calls from Celeste had been blocked, and school administrators had been instructed not to share the boys' contact information with her. For 20 years, Alistair had allowed his grandsons to believe the woman who saved them had stopped caring. For 20 years, he had allowed Celeste to believe the boys had forgotten her. The brothers began searching for her immediately. But Pine Hollow had changed. Records were incomplete. Celeste had withdrawn from almost every public part of her life. Her house was still listed under an old family trust in Evelyn Morgan's name. Mabel's old articles falsely suggested Celeste had left town years earlier. Every lead seemed to end in another dead file, another wrong address, another person who remembered her only through rumor. Then, nearly 4 years later, Silas found a hospital billing record connected to an old charity program. It led them back to Pine Hollow. It led them to a foreclosure notice. And it led them to a woman sitting alone in a dark house with one suitcase by the door, believing that the last thing she had left was about to be taken from her too. Celeste did not recognize them at first. 20 years can change a child's face so completely that memory has to search for smaller things. A way of standing. A habit of looking away when overwhelmed. A hand that turns a ring around a finger whenever anger is trying to rise. She saw Owen first in the oldest man's posture. He still carried his shoulders slightly forward, as if he were ready to shield someone smaller behind him. She saw Matteo in the way the middle brother glanced at the porch bench before looking anywhere else. And she saw Silas when the youngest man raised the battered silver flashlight and held it carefully, not as an object, but as proof that he had carried part of her with him all his life. For a moment, Celeste could not breathe. She had imagined this day so many times that reality felt almost cruel. In some versions, the boys had come back angry. In others, They had come back only long enough to explain why they had stayed away. In the saddest versions, they had never come back at all. Now they were standing in front of her, grown into men she had not been allowed to know. Owen stepped forward first. He did not begin with an excuse. He did not say that time had healed anything. He opened the briefcase and placed the letters on Celeste's kitchen table. Her hands shook when she saw her own handwriting. There were envelopes she remembered licking, closed in the middle of the night. There were stamps she had bought instead of medicine one winter, because she had believed a message from a mother mattered more than comfort. There were letters she had written after cancer treatment, when she could barely hold a pen steady. There were birthday cards for boys who had become men before she was allowed to see them again. She picked up one envelope and stared at it for so long that nobody spoke. Then she looked at Owen. The grief in his face told her everything. The boys had not forgotten. They had been kept from her. The reunion did not become easy, simply because the truth had been found. There were too many missing years, too many birthdays, too many first jobs, graduations, illnesses, heartbreaks, and ordinary afternoons that should have belonged to a family, but had been stolen by pride and silence. Celeste did not rush to fill that space with speeches. She made coffee. It was what she had done whenever someone came into her home carrying pain. They sat around the same kitchen table where Owen had once hidden crackers in his pockets, where Mateo had built his crooked shelf, where Silas had left paper stars beside her mug. The wood was more worn now. The chairs did not match. The room still smelled faintly of coffee, old paint, and the lemon cleaner Celeste had used for decades. Owen told her about the letters. Mateo told her about the years they had spent wondering whether she had chosen to let them go. Silas told her that he had kept the flashlight because it was the only thing from their old life that no one had managed to take from him. Celeste listened. She did not blame them. They had been children when they were taken away. Later, they had been young men trying to survive inside a family that treated obedience like gratitude. They had believed what they were told because children often believe the adults who control the doors around them. But the truth did not erase the damage. Celeste had spent 2 decades asking herself whether she had failed them. She had wondered if Owen had become ashamed of her. She had feared Mateo had turned his anger against the world because she wasn't there to help him carry it. She had imagined Silas losing his voice again, alone in some cold room far from the house where he had first begun to speak. For 20 years, she had lived with a wound that had no explanation. Now the explanation was sitting in front of her in a stack of unopened letters. Owen told her they had not come only to apologize. The bank had scheduled the house for auction because Celeste had fallen behind after years of medical bills, property taxes, and repairs. She had never complained publicly. She had sold what she could, delayed treatment when she should not have, and tried to keep the house because it was the last place in the world where she still felt connected to the boys. Owen had already paid the debt, not as a favor that would leave her feeling indebted, not as a grand gesture for cameras. He had arranged for the home to be protected through a legal trust that Celeste controlled herself. The house would remain hers. The land would remain hers. No company, bank, or relative would ever have the power to take it from her again. Mateo had brought plans to repair the roof, reinforce the foundation, rebuild the porch, and restore the garden. But he had made one thing clear from the beginning. Nothing would be changed without Celeste's approval. They were not there to turn her home into a museum of their guilt. They were there to give her back the security she should have had all along. Silas had something different. He had spent years making documentaries about people who had been overlooked by systems larger than themselves. He knew how to find the truth inside old records, erased histories, and stories that powerful people preferred to keep buried. He had spent months gathering proof of what happened in Pine Hollow. He found the court documents showing that Celeste had never been declared abusive or dangerous. He found the licensing records showing that her only obstacles had been financial and structural, not moral. He found letters from Cassandra Reed praising Celeste's care. He found statements from teachers, George Bell, hospital staff, and neighbors who remembered the boy's improvement after moving into Celeste's home. Most of all, he found Mabel Crew's old articles. The stories had been carefully written to avoid legal consequences, but their meaning had been obvious. Mabel had turned uncertainty into suspicion, and suspicion into public judgment. Her words had helped isolate Celeste at the moment she needed community most. Mabel was still in Pine Hollow. She had become older, slower, and more respected than she deserved to be. She sat on the community advisory board. She ran local heritage events. People called her a historian, though much of her work had been built on stories she never bothered to verify. Owen, Mateo, and Silas did not want revenge in the way most people imagined revenge. They did not want to humiliate Mabel for entertainment. They did not want to use their money to make her suffer. They wanted the town to face what it had done. And they wanted to create something that would prevent another family from being treated the same way. A week later, Pine Hollow held a public town meeting at the old municipal hall. The official purpose of the meeting was a redevelopment proposal. A private company had offered to buy several older properties near the edge of town, including homes once owned by low-income families. The plan promised new shops, parking spaces, and increased tax revenue. Many residents supported it because the town had struggled for years. Few people knew that Owen had purchased the development company's controlling interest months earlier. Few people knew that Mateo had spent years working with transitional housing programs for young adults, leaving foster care. Few people knew that Silas had prepared a short documentary built from old records, interviews, photographs, and the letters Alistair had hidden. The hall was full that night. Mabel sat near the front in a navy blue jacket, smiling at people who greeted her. She had no idea that the story she once helped bury was about to return. Celeste almost did not go. She had spent so many years avoiding public spaces that the thought of sitting in a crowded room made her chest tighten. She did not want pity. She did not want strangers looking at her with guilty eyes. She did not want her pain turned into a spectacle. But Silas told her, gently and without pressure, that the decision was hers. Celeste thought about the 3 boys who had once been too afraid to believe they would stay together. She thought about the younger version of herself, standing in a courtroom, while strangers discussed whether love was enough. She thought about every person who had heard a lie about her, and chosen silence, because silence was easier than asking for the truth. So she went. She wore a simple green dress she had owned for years. Owen walked beside her. Mateo carried a folder of documents. Silas held the old flashlight in one hand and a small box of paper stars in the other. The meeting began like every other meeting in Pine Hollow. The mayor spoke about investment. Council members discussed property values. Mabel made notes, as though she had already decided how the story would be told in the next edition of her bulletin. Then Owen stood. He introduced himself not as the head of Vale Holdings, but as a former foster child who had once been told that love could not compete with wealth. He explained that his company would not support the demolition plan. Instead, the Vale brothers were creating the Porch Light Foundation, a fund dedicated to keeping siblings together in foster care, supporting emergency caregivers, helping low-income families meet housing requirements, and giving young people leaving the foster system a safe place to begin again. The fund would provide grants for home repairs, medical support, legal advocacy, school supplies, counseling, and temporary housing. It would also create a local family resource center in Pine Hollow, not in a distant city where people had to drive hours to ask for help. Mateo explained that the old neighborhood would not be demolished. Several homes would be renovated and converted into short-term housing for foster families, grandparents raising grandchildren, and women rebuilding after medical or financial crises. The project would not be named after the Vale family. It would be named after the woman who taught them what home meant. Then Silas stepped forward. The room grew quiet as he placed the old flashlight on the table beside him. He explained that it had belonged to a boy who once believed nobody would come for him. He explained that the woman who carried that boy through floodwater had later been painted as unstable, selfish, and unfit by people who never bothered to learn the truth. The lights dimmed. A screen behind him came alive. For the next 12 minutes, Pine Hollow watched the story it had refused to see. They saw photographs of Celeste's house before the boys arrived. They saw a copy of her emergency caregiver certification. They saw records of Owen's improved school attendance, Mateo's workshop reports, and Silas's first documented words after months of silence. They saw court records showing that Celeste had never been accused of abuse or neglect. They saw excerpts from the letters she had written, each one filled with patience, worry, and love. They saw the false assumptions that had spread through town, repeated so often that many people had mistaken them for fact. And finally, they saw Mabel's own articles. Nobody shouted. Nobody needed to. The silence in the room was heavier than anger. Mabel sat frozen in her chair. For years, she had believed that the harm she caused was small, because she had never put her hands on anyone. She had not taken the boys away. She had not blocked the letters. She had not stood in the courtroom, but she had helped make Celeste alone. She had given people permission to look away. When the film ended, Mabel stood slowly. Her voice shook as she admitted that she had never verified the claims she printed. She had relied on gossip, on assumptions, and on the belief that a poor woman with no powerful family behind her would never have the ability to challenge her. She said that she had told herself she was protecting the community, but the truth was harder. She had enjoyed being the person who decided whose story mattered. Mabel apologized to Celeste in front of the entire town. Celeste did not rush to embrace her. She did not perform forgiveness for the comfort of people who wanted the evening to end neatly. Instead, she told Mabel that an apology was not the same as repair. Truth had to be spoken. Harm had to be acknowledged. Change had to be proven over time. The room listened. For the first time in decades, Celeste was not speaking from a place of shame. She was speaking from dignity. Mabel resigned from the Community Advisory Board the following month. She published a full correction in the Pine Hollow Bulletin, naming the false assumptions and admitting the damage they caused. She donated the profits from her local history books to the Porchlight Foundation. It did not erase the years Celeste lost, but it changed what would happen next. The town began to change in smaller ways too. The church pantry asked Celeste to return, not as a volunteer carrying boxes, but as an advisor for families in crisis. The archive building that once dismissed her offered her access to records for the foundation's work. Teachers who had remained silent when Mabel's rumors spread began supporting a school program for children in temporary housing. George Bell, now old and walking with a cane, came to the Morgan house one afternoon, carrying Mateo's first wooden shelf. He had kept it safe after Celeste lost storage space during treatment. Mateo hung it back in the kitchen himself, Owen repaired the back fence. Mateo rebuilt the porch bench. Silas framed several of the paper stars and placed them along the hallway wall. The house changed, but it did not become unfamiliar. The cracked boards were replaced. The roof no longer leaked. The heating system worked. The garden came back to life. But Celeste insisted that the old porch light remain exactly where it had always been. It was cleaned, repaired, and fitted with a new bulb. But it was still the same light. The first Thanksgiving after the brothers returned, the kitchen was too crowded. Mateo burned the rolls because he was trying to cook and argue with Owen at the same time. Owen complained about the table being too small, even though he had built an extension for it himself. Silas sat quietly for a while, watching them with the soft expression of someone who had waited too long to see a room full of people feel safe. Celeste looked around the table and understood something she had not been able to understand before. She had not failed. She had never failed them. What had happened was not proof that love had been too weak. It was proof that power could be cruel when it valued ownership over care. But even after 20 years of silence, the boys had remembered the truth of what she gave them. Not every detail, not every day, but the feeling. They remembered being wanted. They remembered being safe. They remembered the light. Months later, on another rainy evening, Celeste was sitting on the porch when Cassandra Reed's daughter came up the walkway. Cassandra herself had retired years earlier, but her daughter had followed her into social work. She was not there to ask Celeste to take in another child. Celeste was older now. She had earned the right to rest. Nobody expected her to begin again from nothing. But the young social worker had brought a 12-year-old girl named Ava, who had been moved 3 times in 6 months and was waiting for a temporary place to stay while a kinship arrangement was being reviewed. Ava stood under the porch roof with a duffel bag pressed tightly against her side. She looked at the house the way Owen, Mateo, and Silas had once looked at it. Not with hope. Not yet. With caution. Celeste did not make promises she could not keep. She simply invited Ava inside for a meal. Owen set another chair at the table. Mateo pulled a dry blanket from the closet. Silas showed Ava the paper stars in the hallway and explained, without using too many words, that they had been made by someone who once did not know how to speak. Outside, rain tapped against the porch roof. Inside, the house grew warm. And before the night was over, Celeste walked to the front door and turned on the light. Because family is not only blood. It is not money, property, a last name, or a promise written into a legal document. Family is the person who keeps a place for you when the world has convinced you that you do not belong anywhere. Family is the hand that reaches for you in floodwater. Family is the home that waits without asking whether you deserve to return. And sometimes, after years of darkness, all it takes to find your way back is one porch light that never went out. Before anyone knew his name, a soaked stranger walked into the restaurant looking like he might not survive another minute.
Do not let him near the tables.
Then his strength faded in the middle of lunch, and the room treated his need like something shameful to avoid. Only Naomi moved toward him, not because she was fearless, but because everyone else had chosen distance.
Somebody call emergency services now.
Naomi saw a human being where everyone else saw trouble, dirt, danger, or an interruption to their lunch.
Please, I'm sorry.
Kendra Blythe did not ask whether the man was breathing. She only saw him as a stain on her restaurant.
Stand up before you make this place look filthy.
Naomi had almost nothing left, but she spent her last money, so the stranger would not reach the hospital hungry.
Compassion is not in your job description. Take off the apron. You are done here. Use the back door. Even let her leave through the front door.
She sent Naomi into the rain like shame belonged to her. The customers who had watched Naomi kneel beside a dying man now watched her lose her job for it. Some looked away. Some looked embarrassed. Some looked relieved that the punishment had not landed on them. Only one person tried to follow her. A busboy named Isaiah, barely 19, took 2 steps forward before Kendra's stare pinned him back in place. He had 2 younger sisters and a mother on disability. Fear did what cruelty always depends on it to do. Naomi left with her apron folded in her hands, her final tip still trapped in Kendra's locked drawer, and rain soaking through her shoes by the time she reached the bus stop. That night, she told her Aunt Lottie only part of the truth. Lottie Reed was 68, though illness had aged her unevenly. Some mornings, she remembered entire hymns from childhood and the smell of Naomi's mother's perfume. Other mornings, she forgot the word for window. A stroke 3 years earlier had weakened her left side, and a slow fog had settled over her memory after that, arriving in patches that came and went without warning. Naomi had moved into the little apartment on Anson Street to care for her after Naomi's mother died of heart failure, because there had been no one else willing and no money for proper help. Naomi had once been on a different path. At 18, she had graduated near the top of her class, with a scholarship letter from a nursing program folded in a Bible on her mother's dresser. Teachers had called her steady. Counselors had called her promising. Her mother had called her the one who would break the cycle. But cycles do not break just because a letter says congratulations. Sometimes they tighten. Sometimes a hospital bill arrives. Sometimes a caregiver is needed more urgently than a dreamer. So Naomi traded lecture halls for double shifts, textbooks for order pads, and a future with clean white shoes for work shoes that pinched until her toes went numb. She did not regret caring for Lottie. Love was not the problem. The problem was that love did not pay rent, did not refill prescriptions, did not stop landlords from taping notices to doors. The problem was that people praised sacrifice from a distance, then punished the person making it for being tired. By dawn, after the longest night of her life, Naomi had calculated everything and found no answer. Without the diner, she had no paycheck. Without the paycheck, she had no rent. Without rent, Lottie could lose the only home she recognized. Naomi had prayed, but even prayer felt like it had to squeeze through a ceiling crowded with other desperate voices. Then the envelope came. It did not arrive in the mail. It did not come with a knock. It slid silently under the door just before sunrise, a pale blue rectangle against the scratched wooden floor. Naomi stared at it for several seconds before standing. Her first thought was that it might be another notice from the landlord. Her second was that she no longer had room in her chest for one more bad thing. The envelope had her name written across the front in dark ink, not printed. Written, Naomi Reed. The letters were careful, almost old-fashioned. There was no return address, only a small embossed mark in the corner, a lantern surrounded by 3 waves. Inside was not money. That almost disappointed her before she could stop herself. Inside was a single card, thick and expensive, with an address on East Bay Street and a request for her presence that morning at 9. Beneath the address was a line that made Naomi sit down before her knees could make the decision for her. It said that her act at the Mariners' table had not gone unseen. That was all. No explanation. No signature she recognized. Just that sentence, sitting in her lap like a match struck in a dark room. Naomi almost threw it away. People in trouble learn caution. Miracles, when they appear too suddenly, often come with hidden hooks. But the address belonged to the old Peabody House, a restored building near the harbor that Naomi knew only from passing it on the bus. It had once been a shipping office. Now, according to the brass plaque she had seen from the sidewalk, it belonged to something called the Lantern Harbor Foundation. She searched the name on her cracked phone. The screen loaded slowly, then showed a website full of polished photographs, food programs, mobile clinics, emergency shelters, legal aid, hurricane relief. The foundation had been started decades earlier by a shipping family that had turned old warehouse money into charity. Its current chair was a woman named Celeste Vane, known in Charleston for giving away money with one hand and guarding her privacy with the other. Naomi did not understand what any of it had to do with her. Still, at 8:30, after making sure Lottie had breakfast and leaving the neighbor with a number to call in case of trouble, Naomi put on her cleanest blouse, brushed lint from her coat, and took the bus toward East Bay Street. She carried the blue envelope in her bag like evidence in a trial no one had explained. The Peabody House looked even larger up close. Its windows were tall and arched, its brick washed clean by rain, its front steps flanked by planters full of white flowers that looked too expensive to touch. Naomi paused at the bottom step, suddenly aware of her shoes, her tired eyes, and the faint smell of diner grease still caught in her hair, no matter how carefully she had washed it. A security guard opened the door before she reached it. He did not ask whether she belonged. He said her name with respect and guided her inside. That unsettled her, more than suspicion would have. The lobby was warm and quiet. Not rich in the loud way of chandeliers and marble meant to impress, but in the deep, quiet way of places built by people who expect the world to move aside. Oil paintings lined the walls. A long table held brochures about flood relief and food access. Near the back, through a set of open doors, Naomi saw a conference room where 3 people stood waiting. One was Celeste Vane. She was in her 70s, silver-haired, straight-backed, and smaller than Naomi expected. Her face held the calm of someone who had survived more than her portrait suggested. Beside her stood a lawyer with a leather folder, and near the window, wrapped in a clean sweater, thinner but alive, was the man from the diner. Naomi stopped breathing for a moment. The man looked different without rainwater dripping from his coat. His beard had been trimmed. His skin still carried the grayness of recovery, but his eyes were clear. He was not polished. He was not suddenly transformed into someone untouched by pain, but he was alive. And when he saw Naomi, the shame in his expression changed into something more fragile and more difficult to bear: gratitude. Celeste Vane did not begin with grand speeches. She explained gently that the man Naomi had helped was named Adrian Vane, her only son. He had not been missing in the way newspapers like to describe missing heirs. His story was messier, more human, and far less convenient for gossip. Years earlier, after the death of his wife and little daughter in a highway accident, Adrian had withdrawn from the world he once helped serve. Grief had taken the shape of silence, then isolation, then a long wandering that no family money could easily fix. He had refused interviews, refused board meetings, refused even the name that tied him to wealth. For months, he had been living between shelters, ferry terminals, and hospital waiting rooms, convinced that the comfort of his family was something he no longer deserved. The foundation had searched for him quietly. Too much publicity could have turned his suffering into entertainment. Too much pressure could have driven him farther away. On the day Naomi found him, Adrian had been trying to reach the foundation office on foot after losing his medication and his wallet during a storm. He had made it only as far as the mariner's table. Every person in that restaurant had seen a problem. Naomi had seen a person. Celeste made sure Naomi understood that this difference had likely saved Adrian's life. The emergency physician had said another hour in the cold rain, with his blood sugar collapsing and his body weakened, might have ended very differently. The meal Naomi paid for had arrived with the paramedics' paperwork and had become the detail that made everyone at the hospital talk, not because of its cost, but because of what it cost Naomi. Naomi felt heat rise behind her eyes. She tried to say that anyone would have done the same, but even as the thought formed, she knew it was not true. Everyone had been there. Everyone had seen him. Most had chosen distance. Celeste then did something Naomi did not expect. She did not offer a reward in the crude way people sometimes pay for conscience, as if kindness were a lost wallet returned for a fee. Instead, she asked Naomi about her life, not with pity, not with the polished curiosity of donors touring poverty for an afternoon. She asked as if Naomi's answers mattered. Naomi did not tell everything at first. Pride has its own survival instinct. But Celeste had spent decades listening to people who were tired of needing help, and she knew how to wait. Slowly, Naomi told her about Lottie, the unpaid rent, the nursing scholarship that had expired, the diner job, and the way Kendra had dismissed her in front of a room full of witnesses. She left out the most humiliating details until Adrian, from beside the window, lowered his head as though each one had landed on him personally. By the end of the meeting, Naomi's life had changed in ways she could not immediately absorb. The Lantern Harbor Foundation offered her a position coordinating a new community meals program called Harbor Hands, which would partner with local restaurants to create emergency meal vouchers for people in crisis. The salary was more than double what she had made at the diner. The benefits included home care support that could help with Lottie's medical needs. The foundation's housing attorney would contact Naomi's landlord that afternoon to stop the eviction and settle the arrears from a hardship fund, not as charity tossed from above, but as stabilization for a caregiver who had been carrying too much alone. Naomi listened with her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles ached. She had expected, at most, a thank you note, perhaps a small check, perhaps nothing she could rely on. She had not expected an opening. She had not expected someone to look at her years of sacrifice and see qualifications instead of weakness. Celeste explained that the foundation did not need someone who merely understood policy. It needed someone who understood hunger without making hungry people feel small. It needed someone who knew the difference between feeding a person and humiliating them. It needed someone who had proven, under pressure, that human dignity mattered even when it was inconvenient. Naomi accepted. But stories like Naomi's do not end the moment good news arrives. In real life, blessings often disturb the people who benefited from your struggle. And Kendra Blythe had built too much of her little kingdom on Naomi, staying silent, poor, and disposable to accept Naomi's rise quietly. At first, Kendra only heard rumors. A delivery driver mentioned that the waitress she had fired had been seen entering the Peabody house. A former customer called the restaurant, asking whether it was true that the woman who helped the collapsed man now worked for the Lantern Harbor Foundation. Isaiah, trying and failing to hide his smile, told another server that Naomi's rent had been handled and her aunt would get medical support. By closing time, Kendra was no longer angry. She was afraid. Fear is different in people who are used to having power. It does not make them humble. It makes them dangerous. Kendra knew things the staff did not. She knew that for nearly 2 years, she had been skimming from the cash drawer in small amounts that looked like counting errors. She knew she had been marking donated community meals as served, then pocketing the reimbursement money when the owner was away. She knew she had refused hungry people at the door while reporting that the restaurant had participated in local relief efforts. She knew the jar labeled Storm Meal Fund had been emptied by her hand more than once. Its coins and bills treated as a private bonus for the trouble of pretending to care. She also knew Naomi had noticed irregularities. Naomi had never accused her. Naomi had been too busy surviving, but she had asked questions. She had once wondered why a church group's prepaid meal vouchers were missing from the drawer. She had once found a voided receipt under the printer with Kendra's manager code on it. She had once given a free bowl of gumbo to a veteran after Kendra claimed the voucher program had ended, only for Naomi to discover the next week that the program was still active. At the time, Kendra had dismissed the questions as confusion. Now she saw them as threats. By the next morning, Kendra had created a new story. According to her, Naomi had not been fired for helping a stranger. Naomi had been fired after an internal review suggested she had stolen money from the register and used a medical emergency to distract from it. Kendra did not make the accusation loudly at first. She was too strategic. She let it leak in pieces, through staff whispers, through a carefully worded email to the restaurant owner, through a complaint sent to the Lantern Harbor Foundation's general inbox. The complaint claimed that Naomi Reed was dishonest, unstable, and unfit to handle charitable funds. To make the lie look official, Kendra pressured Isaiah to sign a witness note stating that he had seen Naomi near the drawer before cash went missing. Isaiah refused at first. He said he had seen nothing like that. But Kendra knew his schedule, his family situation, and his fear of losing the only job close enough to home. She cut his hours in half for 1 week, then returned them with a warning hidden behind a smile. By the second week, Isaiah signed a statement he hated himself for signing. Kendra also convinced a prep cook named Marisol to say Naomi had been upset about money. That part was technically true, which made the lie harder to fight. Naomi had been upset about money because poverty had been pressing its knee against her chest for years. Kendra twisted that human truth into motive. When the foundation received the complaint, they did what responsible organizations must do. They placed Naomi on temporary administrative leave while the matter was reviewed. Celeste herself called Naomi and made it clear that leave was not judgment, but process. Still, the word leave felt like a door closing. Naomi had held her new job for only 11 days. The apartment that had begun to feel safe became heavy again. Lottie sensed Naomi's sadness even through the fog of her memory. Some evenings, she reached for Naomi's hand without knowing exactly why. Naomi tried not to cry in front of her. She had cried enough into dishwater, enough into bus windows, enough silently behind the walk-in freezer at the diner. She was tired of tears that changed nothing. What hurt most was not even the risk of losing the job. It was the precision of the lie. Kendra had chosen the accusation that would wound Naomi deepest because Naomi had spent her whole life guarding her integrity. Poor people learned that one mistake can become their whole identity. In the mouths of people looking for reasons to dismiss them, Naomi had always kept receipts, counted change twice, returned overpayments, corrected tips when customers wrote too much by accident. She knew how quickly a black woman in a service uniform could be called dishonest by someone whose own theft wore perfume and a manager badge. For 3 days, Naomi heard nothing. During those 3 days, Kendra enjoyed herself. She moved through the mariner's table with renewed sharpness, telling staff that consequences were finally catching up with people who played saint for attention. She pretended not to care when customers asked about Naomi, then made sure they received a version of events muddy enough to stain her. She even printed a new policy about employee conduct during emergencies, as if compassion had been a workplace hazard. But lies require maintenance. Truth can sit quietly and wait. The first crack came from Isaiah. Guilt can make a room feel too small. Isaiah stopped sleeping. He replayed the moment Naomi knelt beside Adrian, the way she had held his hand without flinching, the way everyone else, including him, had stood back. He replayed the moment Kendra pushed the witness note toward him and reminded him how many people wanted his job. He thought about his sisters, yes, but he also thought about what kind of man he was becoming if fear could make him harm the one person who had always treated him like he mattered. On the 4th morning, Isaiah went to the foundation office before his shift. He arrived shaking harder than Adrian had shaken in the diner, carrying a folded copy of the statement he had signed. He told the foundation's review attorney that it was false. He admitted Kendra had pressured him. He admitted he had never seen Naomi steal anything. He admitted something else, too. For months, he had watched Kendra remove cash from the Storm Meal Fund jar and replace donation vouchers with blank slips. That confession did not clear Naomi immediately, but it shifted the room. The second crack came from Marisol. She had been quiet for years because she needed work, and because Kendra had a way of making every immigrant employee feel one document away from disaster, whether that was true or not. Marisol had signed nothing, but she had allowed Kendra to use her name in the complaint. When she learned Isaiah had gone to the foundation, she did not want him standing alone. She brought what Kendra had forgotten existed: photographs. Months earlier, Marisol had photographed several prep lists and reimbursement sheets because Kendra kept blaming kitchen staff for missing voucher meals. At the time, Marisol had only wanted proof that the kitchen had prepared what it was told to prepare. But the photos showed a pattern. On days when the restaurant claimed to have served 20 donated meals, the kitchen had prepared 6. On days when reimbursement forms showed full distribution, staff meal logs showed no matching plates. Several forms had Kendra's manager code. Some had Naomi's initials forged badly enough that anyone who knew her handwriting could see the insult. The third crack came from Adrian. Recovery had not made him suddenly powerful in the way people imagine wealth fixes everything. He was still grieving. He still moved carefully through rooms. He still carried guilt like a second spine. But he had one thing Kendra had not counted on: memory sharpened by humiliation. Adrian remembered the man in the navy suit recording him when he fell. He remembered the angle of the phone. He remembered the table. He remembered the woman at the register who had complained about the interruption while filming half the room. The foundation's attorney tracked the video after a younger staff member found a clipped version online, posted without context, under a caption mocking the stranger on the floor. The internet, for all its cruelty, sometimes preserves what liars hope will disappear. The clipped version showed Naomi kneeling. It showed customers backing away. It showed Kendra standing with folded arms. But it did not show the register clearly. The foundation needed more. The restaurant's internal cameras, according to Kendra, had malfunctioned that day. The owner, Mr. Harlan Cho, was told the system had overwritten the footage. That should have ended the matter. It did not. Mr. Cho had inherited the mariner's table from his father, who had opened it after serving as a Navy cook. Harlan was not a cruel man, but he was an absent one. And absence in leadership often becomes permission for someone worse to take over. He had trusted Kendra because she kept the restaurant profitable and problems quiet. He had ignored small complaints because he was tired, overextended, and grieving his own divorce. When the Lantern Harbor Foundation contacted him directly, he expected a misunderstanding. Instead, he discovered that his security system had not failed. Kendra had disabled the local storage, but she had forgotten about the backup connected to the insurance provider after a break-in the previous year. The footage wasn't on the restaurant computer. It was in a secure archive she did not know how to erase. Harlan watched it alone first. He watched Naomi serving tables during the rush. He watched Adrian enter, soaked and unsteady. He watched the room recoil. He watched Naomi kneel while Kendra stood back. He watched Naomi ask for emergency help. He watched her pay at the register with her own debit card, not remove money from it. He watched Kendra take Naomi's apron and send her out the side door. Then Harlan kept watching. The archive held more than that day. It held weeks. It held Kendra opening the donation jar after closing. It held her removing envelopes from the voucher drawer. It held her entering manager codes during cash outs, voiding meals that had been paid for by community partners, and slipping bills into the side pocket of her blazer. It held her handing Isaiah the witness note in the storage hallway, pointing toward the schedule board, and making the threat clear even without audio. The truth had not needed to shout. It had needed someone to look. When Naomi was called back to the foundation office, she expected another question, another form, another polite expression from people deciding whether to believe her. Instead, she found Celeste, Adrian, Harlan Cho, Isaiah, Marisol, and the foundation attorney seated around the same conference table where hope had first begun to feel possible. Naomi stood at the doorway, uncertain whether she had entered a trial or a rescue. Celeste did not make her wait. She explained that the accusations had been withdrawn, disproven, and referred for further action. Harlan apologized, with a face so pale, it seemed the shame had drained him. He admitted that his trust in Kendra had allowed harm to grow under his roof. Isaiah cried before he could finish his apology. Marisol kept her eyes lowered until Naomi crossed the room and touched her shoulder. Not because Naomi owed anyone comfort, but because she understood what fear could do to good people trapped under bad authority. Adrian said the least, but his presence said enough. He had been the man on the floor. Now he was one of the reasons the truth was standing. Naomi was cleared fully. Her leave was ended. Her name was restored. But restoration, for someone who has been publicly humiliated, is not simply a letter saying the matter is closed. A lie travels through people. It enters rooms before you do. It sits in the air, waiting to see whether you will defend yourself or shrink. Celeste understood that. So did Harlan. The Mariners' table held a staff meeting the following Monday before opening. This time, Naomi did not enter through the side door. She entered through the front. The same bell rang above her head, bright and careless, just as it had the day Adrian collapsed. But the room felt different now. The chairs were stacked on tables. The floor smelled of lemon cleaner. The staff stood near the counter, tense and quiet. Kendra was there too, though no longer behind the host stand. Her makeup was perfect, but her face had lost the confidence that once made people step aside. Harlan spoke first, not with the polished language of corporate apologies, but with the rough honesty of a man who had finally looked at what his neglect had cost. He told the staff that Naomi Reed had been wrongfully fired, falsely accused, and publicly mistreated for doing what every decent person in that room should have done. He confirmed that Kendra Blythe had been terminated for cause, and that evidence of theft, intimidation, falsification of records, and charity fraud had been turned over to the proper authorities. Kendra tried to hold herself stiff, as if posture could substitute for innocence. But there are moments when a person's own silence becomes a confession. She had spent years making others feel small under fluorescent lights. Now she stood under the same lights, while the room learned what she had done. The poetic justice was not loud, it was precise. Kendra had fired Naomi for feeding a hungry stranger, and now the theft that destroyed her reputation came from money meant to feed hungry strangers. She had accused Naomi of stealing from a register, and the register logs exposed her. She had used employees' fear to create false statements, and those same employees became the witnesses who helped undo her. She had sent Naomi through the side door in shame, and Naomi returned through the front, while Kendra left, escorted by the owner she had deceived. No one applauded. It was better that way. Applause might have made it feel like a performance. This was not a performance. It was accountability. Kendra's downfall did not end at the sidewalk. Investigators later found that the stolen voucher funds were larger than anyone first believed. Several small churches had paid the Mariners' Table in advance to provide hot meals during storms, believing their donations had reached people who needed them. Some had not. A veterans group had sponsored meal cards that were quietly canceled in the system. A neighborhood relief fund had been billed for plates never served. Kendra had not merely stolen cash. She had stolen trust from people who gave what little they had to help others. The charges that followed did not make Naomi happy. She was not the kind of person who found joy in someone else's ruin. But she did feel something steadier than happiness. She felt the weight of a foot lifting from her neck. She felt the world, for once, refusing to ask the wounded person to be the only one who pays. Kendra tried to find another management job, but Charleston is smaller than pride imagines. People talk, records travel, references matter. The same polished confidence that once opened doors now raised questions she could not answer. For the first time in years, Kendra had to live without the protection of a title, and without people beneath her to blame. Naomi returned to the Lantern Harbor Foundation the next day, not as a woman rescued by luck, but as someone beginning the work she had been preparing for her whole life without knowing it. Harbor Hand started small. At first, it was only a list of 5 restaurants willing to keep emergency meal cards behind the counter. The cards were simple, with no public label that could embarrass the person using them. A church, a shelter nurse, a bus driver, or a school counselor could request one. The meal would be served without questions, without a speech, without making hunger prove itself worthy. Naomi insisted on that. Hunger had already humiliated people enough. She built the program from memory as much as training. She remembered the mother counting coins under the table. She remembered the veteran turned away over a missing voucher. She remembered Adrian's hand trembling on a cold tile floor while strangers measured whether he deserved to be touched. She remembered all the people she had served at the Mariners' Table who were one bad week away from becoming invisible. Her first major policy was called the warm seat rule. Any participating restaurant that accepted foundation funds had to agree that a person in crisis could sit inside safely while waiting for help, even if they could not order immediately. No one would be forced back into rain because discomfort was bad for business. No one would be treated like a threat for needing warmth. Some restaurant owners resisted. They worried about image, customer complaints, and liability. Naomi listened. Then she told them, calmly and without accusation, that a business afraid of being seen helping hungry people was not actually afraid of liability. It was afraid of being reminded what community means. A surprising number signed after that. The Mariners' Table became one of the first official partners. Harlan Cho did more than sign. He changed the restaurant. He installed transparent accounting for every donated meal. He created a staff emergency fund. He hired an outside manager with nonprofit experience. He raised wages modestly but meaningfully, because guilt without structural change is only emotion wearing a better suit. He also placed a small brass plaque near the entrance, not with Naomi's face or a dramatic version of the story, but with a simple line that said every person who entered hungry deserved to leave treated as human. Naomi did not ask for the plaque. At first, she did not even like it. She worried it made her one act of kindness seem exceptional when she believed it should have been ordinary. But Celeste told her that reminders were necessary because decency often disappears not from one grand act of evil, but from 100 small permissions to look away. Adrian slowly returned to himself, though not to the man he had been before tragedy. Some losses do not give back the original version of a person. They make something quieter, deeper, sometimes more compassionate, sometimes more fragile. He began volunteering with Harbor Hands, first behind the scenes, reviewing supply lists and helping design intake forms that did not shame people. Later, he trained with peer support counselors to work with people in grief, addiction recovery, and housing instability. He did not pretend his family name had saved him. In fact, he understood more clearly than anyone that it almost had not. Money had searched for him, but a waitress with $38 had reached him first. That truth changed him. His relationship with Celeste healed slowly. Mother and son had spent years separated by grief, guilt, and all the words each feared would injure the other. Naomi never intruded on that healing. She only noticed, over months, that Adrian stopped standing near exits during meetings. Celeste stopped looking at him as if he might vanish if she blinked. One afternoon, Naomi saw them walk together along the harbor after a fundraiser, not speaking much, simply sharing space. Sometimes that is what forgiveness looks like before it has language. At home, life changed too. The foundation helped Naomi and Lottie move from the drafty apartment on Anson Street into a small but bright unit near a park, with an elevator, reliable heat, and a window where Lottie could watch children chasing pigeons in the afternoon. The first night there, Lottie became agitated because the walls did not feel familiar. Naomi sat with her until the fear passed, describing each room softly, grounding her in the names of things. The next morning, Lottie woke and said the sunlight looked kind. Naomi cried in the kitchen where no one could see. For years, she had measured success in avoided disasters. Rent not late enough to evict. Medicine not empty enough to panic. Electricity not shut off yet. Shoes not broken beyond repair. Now she had space to imagine a life not built entirely around emergencies. She enrolled in evening courses toward a community health certification. not because she needed a title to prove her worth, but because the dream she had buried at 18 still had roots. The scholarship letter from long ago remained in her Bible, creased and yellowing. She did not look at it with grief anymore. She looked at it like evidence that the girl she had been was still somewhere inside the woman she had become, not lost, only waiting. Months passed, and Harbor Hands grew. What began with 5 restaurants became 15, then 28. A mobile meal van joined the program after hurricane season, exposed neighborhoods where older residents could not reach distribution sites. School counselors started calling when students came to class, hungry after weekends. Hospital social workers requested meal cards for discharged patients who had nowhere stable to go. Bus drivers carried small information cards because they were often the first to see who was sleeping where the city pretended not to look. Naomi worked harder than she ever had at the diner, but the work no longer shrank her. There is a difference between exhaustion that empties you and exhaustion that has meaning. She still had difficult days. She still dealt with budgets, skeptical donors, broken supply chains, and people who assumed compassion could be scheduled neatly between office hours. But she also saw men who had been ignored sit down to hot stew without being watched like criminals. She saw mothers receive grocery boxes before shame could force them to choose between pride and dinner. She saw restaurant workers begin to understand that dignity was not extra service, it was the meal. The story of Naomi's firing eventually reached local news, though Celeste did everything possible to keep it from turning into spectacle. Reporters wanted a clean headline: "Poor waitress saves rich heir. Villain manager exposed. Charity triumphs." But life is rarely that clean. Naomi agreed to one interview only after insisting that the focus remain on food insecurity and worker vulnerability, not on turning her into a saint. She was not a saint. She was a woman who had been tired, broke, and scared, and had still chosen to kneel. That distinction mattered. Saints are easy to admire because people imagine they are different from the rest of us. A tired woman choosing mercy with overdue bills in her pocket is much harder to ignore because she removes the excuse that kindness belongs only to people with spare time, spare money, or spotless lives. The interview aired on a Sunday evening. Naomi watched it with Lottie, who understood pieces of it. At one point, Lottie touched the screen when Naomi appeared, then looked at the real Naomi sitting beside her and smiled with sudden recognition. For one clear moment, the fog lifted enough for pride to pass through. Lottie remembered Naomi's mother then. She remembered the hospital. She remembered the little girl who used to line up dolls and pretend to check their temperatures. She remembered enough to tell Naomi, in her own wandering way, that her mother would have been proud. Naomi held that sentence for days. But the most important moment in Naomi's new life did not happen on television. It happened almost 1 year after the firing, on another rainy Tuesday afternoon, at the reopened Mariner's Table. The restaurant was hosting the launch of an expanded Harbor Hands partnership. There were donors, city officials, restaurant workers, shelter coordinators, and a few regular customers who remembered the old days with uncomfortable clarity. The event could have become polished and empty, the kind of gathering where people discuss hunger over catered trays. Naomi refused to let that happen. Instead of speeches first, she asked everyone to sit for a meal served family style. No VIP table, no reserved corner for donors, no separation between people with checks and people with lived experience. Adrian helped serve. Harlan cleared plates. Celeste sat beside a former shelter resident who now worked as a peer navigator. The room, once divided by fear and judgment, felt almost unfamiliar in its warmth. Near the end, Naomi stood where Kendra had once fired her. She did not describe Kendra with hatred. She did not need to. Hatred would have made Kendra too central to a story that had grown beyond her. Naomi spoke instead about the floor, the actual floor of the restaurant, the tile near table 6 where Adrian had collapsed. She said that every community has a floor like that, a place where someone falls and everyone else must decide what kind of person they are. Some step back, some record, some complain about the inconvenience, and sometimes one person kneels, not because they are fearless, but because they know what it feels like to need someone. She explained that harbor hands existed to make kneeling less lonely. It existed so mercy would not depend on one waitress risking her job or one stranger being connected to a powerful family. It existed because people should not have to be secretly important to be treated as worth saving. That line stayed with everyone. People should not have to be secretly important to be treated as worth saving. Adrian lowered his eyes when she said it. Celeste reached for his hand. Harlan looked toward the doorway, perhaps remembering all the people his restaurant had once allowed to be turned away. Isaiah, now promoted and studying hospitality management with foundation support, wiped his face quickly and pretended he had not. Marisol smiled openly, no longer afraid of being seen. After the event, when the room had emptied and rain softened the windows, Naomi stood for a moment by table 6. The tile had been repaired, where a crack once ran through it. Most people would never know anything had happened there. That seemed right to her. Sacred places do not always announce themselves. Sometimes they hide under ordinary tables in ordinary diners, waiting for ordinary people to make choices that echo farther than they can see. Naomi thought about the blue envelope that had slid under her door before dawn. For a long time, she had believed that envelope was the beginning of her rescue. Now she understood it differently. The rescue had begun earlier, on the floor, when she refused to let the room decide a man's value for her. The envelope had only carried the news that kindness, though delayed, had found its way back. And yet, she also knew kindness did not always return with a foundation job, a new apartment, or public vindication. Sometimes kindness returns quietly. Sometimes it returns years later, through a child who remembers being fed. Sometimes it returns only as the knowledge that you did not become cruel when cruelty would have been easier. That kind of return is harder to measure, but it is real. Naomi kept the blue envelope. She framed it in her office, not because of the address or the embossed lantern, but because of the sentence inside. Her act had not gone unseen. On difficult days, when funding was short or the need felt endless, she looked at that sentence and thought of all the unseen acts happening across the city. A cashier slipping a sandwich into a bag, a bus driver waiting an extra minute for an elderly passenger, a teacher sending food home without making a child explain, a nurse warming a blanket for someone no family had come to visit, a neighbor knocking on a door before the silence became permanent. The world is held together by people who do small mercies without witnesses. But Naomi also learned that mercy must become more than a moment. It must become policy. It must become systems. It must become wages, shelters, meal programs, honest records, and leaders who do not leave vulnerable workers at the mercy of petty tyrants. One good person can save a life. A good community can stop that life from falling so far in the first place. Years later, when people asked Naomi why she helped Adrian that day, they expected a dramatic answer. They expected her to say she sensed he was important, or that fate whispered to her, or that she had some grand vision of what would follow. She always disappointed them gently. She explained that she had no idea who he was. She did not see a foundation heir, a lost son, or a future partner in a citywide program. She saw a man on the floor. That was enough. And maybe that is the part of the story worth carrying with us. Not the envelope, not the money, not the downfall of a cruel manager, satisfying as justice may be. The heart of the story is the moment before reward exists, before witnesses understand, before the world claps, before anyone promises that goodness will be repaid. It is the moment when helping costs something. Naomi lost her job in that moment. She spent the last of her money in that moment. She was humiliated in that moment, but she kept something Kendra could never steal, even with false statements and forged records. She kept the kind of dignity that does not depend on a title. She kept the kind of courage that survives poverty, grief, and exhaustion. She kept the part of herself that still believed a stranger's life was worth bending down for. Kendra, in the end, lost everything she had tried to protect by refusing to bend. She protected the restaurant's image and destroyed her own. She guarded the cash drawer and exposed her theft. She treated compassion as weakness and discovered too late that compassion had witnesses stronger than fear. That is how justice sometimes works. Not always quickly, not always loudly, but with a patience that follows every hidden thing to its door. So the next time you see someone fall, maybe not on a restaurant floor, maybe not in a way anyone else can see, remember Naomi Reed. Remember the room that stepped back. Remember the woman who knelt. Remember that a person does not become worthy of kindness because they are secretly rich, secretly connected, or secretly important. They are worthy because they are human. And if you believe the world still needs people who choose mercy when no one is clapping, carry that belief into the next ordinary moment. Because somewhere, in a diner, on a bus, in a hospital hallway, under a leaking roof, someone is waiting to find out whether the room will turn away or whether one person will remember what humanity is supposed to look like.